Hey friends, welcome to the Horror Sleep. Almost 90% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these true park ranger horror stories, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. The incident I'm about to tell you about happened in the winter of 2019, and I still find myself thinking about it every day. But not in the way you might expect. I don't wake up screaming or avoid going to work. It's more like a splinter lodged under the skin. You forget it's there until you press on the right spot. Then the pain comes back, sudden and sharp, as if it had never gone away. I was 28 when I started working as a winter ranger in Bitterroot National Forest. Most people don't even know there are winter rangers in national forests. They imagine us sitting in cozy cabins somewhere, drinking hot chocolate while it snows outside. The reality is far less romantic. Winter rangers are the ones who check remote areas that regular patrols can't reach when heavy snowfall begins. We are the ones who make sure the gates are secure, that no one is stranded in cabins in the backcountry, and that Forest Service roads aren't endangered by avalanches or fallen trees. It's lonely work, brutally so. You spend days at a time without seeing another human face, navigating terrain that could kill you in a dozen different ways if you make even one small mistake. But I loved it. I'd spent the previous 3 years working summers in Yellowstone, dealing with tourists who wanted to pet the bison and idiots who thought it was a good idea to walk right up to a grizzly bear for a photo. The isolation of winter patrol felt like a gift after all that human contact. My partner that season was Grace Ellison, a woman in her early 40s who'd been with the Forest Service for nearly 20 years. Grace had this way of moving through the woods that made you think she'd been born there. She never seemed to get cold, never complained about the work, and had an almost supernatural ability to predict when weather was about to turn bad. The other rangers called her the Snow Oracle, though never to her face. We'd been working together for about 6 weeks when it happened. The patrol schedule had us checking the northwestern quadrant of the forest, an area that included some of the most remote terrain in Montana. Our route would take us through a series of creek valleys, over 2 mountain passes, and past half a dozen abandoned logging camps from the 1970s. The morning we set out, the sky had that peculiar quality that Montana skies get in deep winter. Pale blue and cloudless, but somehow menacing. The kind of sky that makes you feel small and exposed. Grace looked at it for a long time before we loaded up the snowmobiles. "We should be back before dark," she said, which wasn't really a question, but also wasn't quite a statement. "Should be," I agreed. The first part of the patrol was routine. We checked the gate at Miller Creek, found it secure. Verified that the old ranger station near Bald Mountain hadn't been broken into. Made notes about a few trees that had fallen across the Forest Service road and would need to be cleared come spring. Standard winter ranger work. It was around 2 in the afternoon when we reached Sawmill Creek. The creek runs through a narrow valley, steep mountain walls rising on either side. In summer, it's a rushing torrent of snowmelt, but by late January, it freezes solid, becoming a highway of ice that makes travel easier if you're heading north. We'd stopped to check our route on the GPS when I heard it. At first, I thought it was a bird, some kind of high-pitched chirping that seemed out of place in the dead of winter. But birds don't usually make sounds like that, not this time of year. Most of the songbirds had fled south months ago, and the ravens that stayed behind had deeper, more guttural calls. "You hear that?" I asked Grace. She'd already pulled off her helmet, her head cocked to one side like a dog trying to locate a sound. "Yeah," she said slowly. "What is that?" We both stood there for a moment listening. The sound came again, sharper this time, more insistent. It was definitely coming from the creek bed, maybe 30 yards ahead of us. "Phone alarm," Grace said suddenly. "That's a phone alarm." She was right. Once she said it, I couldn't unhear it. That distinctive digital chirping that smartphones make, the kind of sound that's become so common in modern life that your brain almost filters it out automatically. Except here, in the middle of absolute nowhere, with the temperature hovering around 15 degrees Fahrenheit, hearing a phone alarm felt profoundly wrong. "Could be someone's lost phone," I said, even though I didn't really believe it. "Hiker dropped it last fall, maybe. Sometimes electronics do weird things when they freeze." Grace didn't respond. She was already walking toward the sound, her boots crunching through the top layer of crusty snow. I followed, pulling my own helmet off so I could hear better. The alarm was coming from a spot where the creek made a slight bend, creating a small pool that would have been maybe 3 feet deep in summer. Now it was just a smooth expanse of ice, covered by a thin layer of wind-blown snow. The sound seemed to be coming from directly beneath it. "Definitely under the ice," Grace said, kneeling down at the edge of the frozen pool. "We're going to need to dig it out." "Why?" I asked. It seemed like a waste of time. A lost phone buried under creek ice wasn't exactly a priority for the Forest Service. Grace looked up at me, and there was something in her expression that made my stomach tighten. "Because that alarm is going off right now, Micah, which means the phone is on, which means it has battery, and I don't know about you, but I've never seen a phone that could spend months frozen in a creek and still have enough juice to sound an alarm." She was right, of course. Phones die when they get cold. Anyone who's ever tried to use their smartphone in winter weather knows this. The battery drains at triple the normal rate, and if it gets cold enough, the phone just shuts down completely until it warms up again. The idea that a phone could survive buried in ice and still be functional was, on the face of it, absurd. But there it was, chirping away beneath our feet. We spent the next 20 minutes clearing snow and then chipping away at the ice with the small emergency axes we carried on the snowmobiles. It was hard work, and I kept expecting the alarm to stop at any moment, for the battery to finally give out. But it just kept going, that bright digital sound echoing off the steep valley walls. When we finally broke through to the phone, I felt my breath catch in my throat. It was an iPhone, maybe 2 or 3 years old based on the model. The screen was lit up, bright and clear, showing the alarm interface. The time read 2:47 p.m. The battery indicator showed 100%. Grace picked it up with her gloved hand, and we both just stared at it for a long moment. The phone was encased in a thick protective case, the kind serious hikers use. But even the best cases aren't designed to keep electronics functional after spending months frozen in a creek bed. "Try to unlock it," I said. Grace swiped at the screen with her glove, but nothing happened. She pulled off the glove and tried again with her bare finger. The phone unlocked immediately, no passcode required. The home screen was completely blank, no apps, no photos, no customization of any kind, just the standard default wallpaper that iPhones come with. Grace tapped the phone icon, bringing up the recent calls list. Empty. She tried the Messages app. Empty. Photos. Empty. It was like the phone had been factory reset, wiped clean of any identifying information, except for the alarm. Someone had set an alarm for 2:47 p.m., and that alarm had gone off right on schedule. "Check the settings," I said. "See if there's a name registered to it." Grace navigated to the settings menu. Under the device information, there was a name: Sawmill Creek. We both looked at each other, then looked around at the surrounding landscape. Sawmill Creek. The exact location where we'd found the phone. "That's not a person's name," Grace said quietly. "That's a location." "Maybe someone was doing research out here," I offered. could be a scientist who lost their equipment. They might have named the phone after the location to keep track of it. It was a weak explanation, and we both knew it. But neither of us wanted to acknowledge the alternative explanation that was starting to take shape in my mind. The one that said someone had put this phone here deliberately. That they'd named it after the exact spot where they'd buried it. That they'd set an alarm to go off at a specific time, knowing that someone would eventually hear it. But why? And how had they known someone would be here at exactly 2:47 p.m. on this particular day to hear the alarm? Grace was looking at the battery indicator again. 100%, she said. That's not possible. Even if this phone somehow stayed on through the freeze, the battery should be dead, or at least partially drained, but it's showing full charge. I reached for the phone, turning it over in my hands. The case was scuffed but not damaged, no cracks, no obvious signs of wear beyond normal use. I pressed the volume button expecting to hear some kind of feedback, but the phone was silent except for the alarm, which was still going. "Turn it off," I said. "The alarm, I mean." Grace took the phone back and swiped to dismiss the alarm. The sudden silence was almost oppressive. For a moment, we just stood there in the creek bed, surrounded by ice and snow and steep mountain walls, holding a phone that shouldn't exist. "We should head back," Grace said finally. "Report this to the sheriff's office. Let them figure it out." I nodded, but something was bothering me. "Grace," I said, "did you notice we were running about 15 minutes behind schedule today?" She frowned. "Yeah, we had to reroute around that fallen tree near Miller Creek. Why?" "Because if we'd been on time, we would have passed through this area around 2:30. We would have missed the alarm completely." Grace's face went very still. "You think someone knew we'd be delayed?" "I think someone knew exactly when we'd be here," I said. "Down to the minute." We both looked down at the phone in Grace's hand. The screen had gone dark now, showing only our reflections in the black glass. Behind us, the sun was starting to sink toward the western mountains, casting long shadows across the frozen creek. "We need to go," Grace said, her voice tight. "Right now." We made it back to the ranger station just after dark. The temp had dropped to single digits and my face felt like it had been sandpapered by the wind. But the cold wasn't what was making my hands shake as I helped Grace carry our gear inside. The station was a small log building that served as the administrative hub for the northwestern sector of the forest. During winter, it was mostly empty except for the weekly patrols that passed through. Grace and I were the only rangers scheduled to be in the area for another 3 days. She set the phone down on the desk in the main office, treating it like it might explode. In the warm light of the overhead fluorescence, it looked completely ordinary. Just another smartphone, the kind you'd see in anyone's pocket. "I'm calling Sheriff Morrison," Grace said, reaching for the landline. The ranger station didn't have cell service, but the hardline still worked. "He needs to know about this." While she made the call, I couldn't stop staring at the phone. Something about it was nagging at me, some detail I couldn't quite put my finger on. The way it had been perfectly preserved in the ice, the fully charged battery. The alarm set for the exact moment we'd arrive. Grace hung up the phone and turned to me. "Morrison says he'll send a deputy up tomorrow to collect it. Wants us to keep it secured until then." "Did you tell him about the alarm, about the battery?" I told him everything. Grace sat down heavily in one of the desk chairs. "He thinks it's probably just some hiker's phone that got lost and happened to have a lot of charge when it froze. Says weird things happen with electronics in extreme cold." "You don't believe that?" "No," Grace said quietly. "I don't." We were both silent for a moment. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows of the ranger station. It was going to be a cold night. the kind where the temperature drops so low that the trees start to crack from the freeze. "I want to check something," I said suddenly. I picked up the phone and pressed the home button. The screen lit up immediately, still showing that 100% battery. I opened the settings again, navigating past the device name to the alarm section. There were 6 alarms set. My stomach dropped. When we'd found the phone, there had only been 1 alarm active, the one that had gone off at 2:47 p.m. But now, looking at the list, I could see 6 different alarms, each one set for a specific time and date. The first alarm, the one we'd already heard, was marked as Sawmill Creek completed. The second alarm was set for 11:30 p.m. Tonight. The label read, Ranger Station. Grace leaned over my shoulder to look at the screen. I heard her breath catch. "That's in less than 3 hours," she said. The third alarm was set for 2:15 a.m., North Window. Fourth alarm, 4:45 a.m., Storage Shed. Fifth alarm, 6:30 a.m., Main Road. Sixth alarm, 8 o'clock a.m., Mill Creek Gate. Each alarm was labeled with a location. Each location was a place in our patrol route. And each time was spaced out across the next 18 hours, like someone was tracking our movements, or planning them. "We need to leave," Grace sighed, but her voice sounded distant, like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. "Right now, Micah, we need to get out of here." But I was still staring at the phone, at those 6 alarms laid out like a schedule, like an itinerary. The rational part of my brain was trying to find an explanation that made sense. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe another ranger had set this up as some kind of elaborate joke. But the rational part of my brain was losing the argument to the part that understood, on a deep and instinctive level, that we were in danger. "If we leave now, we'll be traveling in the dark," I said, "in single-digit temperatures. If one of the snowmobiles breaks down or we hit bad weather, we could freeze to death before we make it to the main highway." Grace was already pulling on her jacket. "And if we stay here, what? We wait around to see what happens at 11:30. She had a point. But something was stopping me from running. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the part of me that needed to understand what was happening. You don't work alone in the wilderness for years without developing a certain amount of confidence in your ability to handle dangerous situations. Bears, storms, ice, injury, these were all things I knew how to manage. But this was something else entirely. "What if that's what they want?" I said. "What if the whole point is to make us leave, to panic and run out into the dark?" Grace stopped halfway through zipping her jacket. "Who is they, Micah? Who are we talking about here?" "I don't know. But think about it. Someone went to enormous trouble to plant that phone, to set those alarms, to make sure we'd find it at exactly the right time. They didn't do all that just to watch us drive away. They have a plan, and I guarantee you, running blindly into the night is part of it." Grace stood there for a long moment, her hand still on her zipper. Finally, she let out a long breath that misted in the cold air of the station. The heating system was struggling to keep up with the dropping temperature outside. "So, what do you suggest?" she asked. I looked around the ranger station. It was solid construction, built to withstand heavy snow loads and high winds. The windows were small and high up, difficult to access from outside. There was only one door, a heavy affair with a deadbolt that actually worked. And we had supplies, food, water, emergency gear. If we were smart about it, we could hunker down and wait for the deputy to arrive in the morning. "We fortify," I said. "Lock everything down, keep the lights on, stay alert. We've got radios if we need to call for help, and we've got each other." Grace didn't look convinced, but she nodded slowly. "All right, but if anything, and I mean anything, feels wrong, we're taking the snowmobiles and heading for the highway. Deal? Deal. We spent the next hour securing the ranger station. Checked all the windows, made sure they were locked. Barricaded the door with a heavy filing cabinet. Gathered our emergency gear in the main office so everything would be within reach. We even set up the emergency radio and tested it to make sure we could reach the county sheriff's dispatch if needed. By 11:15 p.m., we were as prepared as we were going to get. Grace had made coffee, strong and black, and we sat at the desk drinking it, watching the clock on the wall tick toward 11:30. The phone sat between us, its screen dark. "Tell me about the worst situation you've ever been in," Grace said suddenly. "Out in the field, I mean." I knew what she was doing, trying to keep our minds occupied, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. But I appreciated it anyway. "Grizzly encounter in Yellowstone," I said. "I was doing a solo backcountry patrol, came around a bend in the trail, and there she was. A sow with 2 cubs, maybe 20 yards away. I made the mistake of surprising her." "What did you do?" "Played dead. She charged me, knocked me down, bit my pack, shook me around like a dog toy, then she just left. Walked away with her cubs like nothing had happened. I laid there for probably half an hour before I could convince myself to move." Grace smiled faintly. "I got caught in a whiteout up near Glacier. Lost all visibility, couldn't see my hand in front of my face. Knew if I kept moving, I'd walk right off a cliff, so I dug a snow cave and waited it out. 36 hours in a hole in the snow, nothing but my emergency gear and a lot of time to think." "What did you think about?" "Mostly about how much I wanted a sandwich." I laughed, and for just a moment, the tension in the room eased. But then the phone's screen lit up, bright in the dim office, and the alarm began to sound. 11:30 p.m., right on schedule. The alarm tone was different this time. Not the gentle chirping we'd heard at the creek. This was harsher, more insistent, almost angry. It filled the small office, echoing off the log walls. Grace reached for the phone, but I caught her hand. "Wait," I said. "Just wait." We sat there, listening to the alarm, and that's when I heard it. Underneath the electronic sound, so faint I almost missed it. Footsteps. Someone was walking around the outside of the ranger station. Grace heard it too. Her hand went to the radio on her belt, but I shook my head. Not yet. We needed to know what we were dealing with before we called for help. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, crunching through the snow. They circled the building once, twice, 3 times. Each time they passed the door, I found myself holding my breath, waiting for the handle to rattle, for someone to try to force their way in. But nobody tried the door. The footsteps just kept circling, around and around, like someone was inspecting the building, taking their time, making sure we knew they were there. The alarm shut off automatically after 2 minutes. The sudden silence was worse than the noise had been. We could still hear the footsteps, but now there was nothing to mask them, nothing to focus on except the sound of boots on snow and the hammering of my own pulse in my ears. Then the footsteps stopped. Grace and I looked at each other. She had her radio in one hand, her other hand gripping the edge of the desk hard enough that her knuckles were white. I realized I was holding my breath, straining to hear any sound from outside. Nothing, just the wind and the creak of the building settling in the cold. "Maybe they left," Grace whispered. I was about to agree when I heard a new sound, a soft scraping, like metal on metal. It was coming from above us, from the roof. Someone was on top of the ranger station. The scraping continued for several minutes, moving from one end of the building to the other. Then it stopped, replaced by a heavy thump that made dust drift down from the ceiling beams. Another thump. Another. "They're trying to get in through the roof," Grace said, standing up abruptly. The ranger station didn't have an attic, just a crawl space between the ceiling and the roof. If someone managed to break through the roof panels, they'd drop right into that crawl space. And from there, it was just a matter of pulling away some insulation and ceiling panels to get into the building itself. "Radio," I said. "Call it in now." Grace grabbed the emergency radio and switched it to the sheriff's frequency. "County Dispatch, this is Bitterroot Ranger Station. Do you copy?" Static. She tried again. "County Dispatch, this is Ranger Ellison at Bitterroot Station. We have an emergency situation. Please respond." More static. "They're jamming us," I said, though I had no idea if that was even possible with this kind of radio. But nothing else made sense. The emergency radio was supposed to work in all conditions, was supposed to be our lifeline if things went wrong. The thumping on the roof had stopped, but now I could hear that scraping sound again, quieter this time, more focused. Someone up there had tools. They were working on getting through. "The snowmobiles," Grace said. "We run for the snowmobiles." It was the only option we had left. Stay here and wait for whoever was on the roof to break through. Or make a run for the equipment shed where we'd parked the snowmobiles and try to reach the highway before they could stop us. We grabbed our coats, our packs, everything we could carry. I took one last look at the phone sitting on the desk, its screen still showing those remaining alarms like promises of things to come. Then I followed Grace to the door. She slid the filing cabinet aside, her movements sharp and controlled. Years of training had taught both of us to stay calm in emergencies, but I could see the fear in her eyes, could feel it mirroring my own. "On 3, she said, her hand on the deadbolt. "We go straight for the shed. Don't look back. Don't stop for anything. Got it?" I nodded. 1, 2, 3. She threw the bolt and yanked the door open. We burst out into the night, into air so cold it felt like inhaling broken glass. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in sharp relief. The snow, the trees, the dark shape of the equipment shed 30 yards away. We ran. Behind us, I heard a crash from inside the ranger station. Whoever had been on the roof had finally broken through, but we were already halfway to the shed, our boots pounding through the crusty snow, breath coming in ragged gasps. Grace reached the shed first and hauled the door open. The snowmobiles were right where we'd left them, side by side in the darkness. She was fumbling for her keys when I heard footsteps behind us. I spun around and saw a figure standing in the open doorway of the ranger station. Backlit by the interior lights, I couldn't make out any details. Just a human silhouette, tall and still, watching us. "Grace," I said, my voice cracking. She'd gotten her snowmobile started, the engine roaring to life in the cold air. "Get on yours, now!" I ran to my snowmobile, yanked the key from my pocket, jammed it into the ignition. The engine turned over once, twice, then caught. I gunned the throttle, and the machine lurched forward, out of the shed and into the open. Grace was already moving, her headlight cutting through the darkness. I followed, looking back once to see if the figure was pursuing us. The doorway of the ranger station was empty. The figure was gone. But as we roared away into the night, heading for the Forest Service road that would take us to the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't escaping. We were just moving to the next point on the schedule, the next alarm on that phone. And whoever had set those alarms was already waiting for us there. The Forest Service road was rough under the snowmobiles, a washboard of ice and frozen ruts that threatened to throw us off at every turn. My headlight beam bounced wildly, illuminating trees and shadows that seemed to reach for us as we passed. The temperature had dropped even further, and the wind cut through my jacket like I wasn't wearing anything at all. Grace was ahead of me by maybe 20 feet, her taillight a red beacon in the darkness. We'd been riding for about 15 minutes when I realized we should have hit the junction with the main road by now. We were going the right direction, I was sure of it. But the road just kept going, winding through the forest with no sign of the highway. I accelerated until I was riding alongside Grace, shouting over the roar of the engines. "Something's wrong. We should have reached the main road." Grace didn't look at me, just kept her eyes fixed ahead. "I know. We're going in circles. We're not." But even as she said it, I saw her headlight illuminate something that made my blood run cold. Snowmobile tracks, fresh ones, cutting across our path, our own tracks. Grace killed her engine. I did the same, and suddenly the night was quiet except for the wind and the sound of our labored breathing. We both looked down at the tracks crossing in front of us, the evidence of our own passage through this same spot maybe 10 minutes earlier. "That's not possible," Grace said. "We've been going straight. We haven't turned around." But we had. Somehow, impossibly, we'd looped back on ourselves. The road that should have taken us to safety had led us in a circle, and now we were right back where we'd started. I checked my watch, 2:10 a.m. 5 minutes until the next alarm. "The phone," I said. It said the next alarm was North Window. That's not a place. It's a direction, north. Grace pulled out her compass, holding it under her headlight. The needle spun lazily, unable to find north. She tapped it, shook it, but the needle just kept drifting. "Electronics," she muttered. "Has to be interference from what?" I interrupted. "Grace, there's nothing out here that could interfere with a magnetic compass. No power lines, no radio towers, nothing." She didn't answer, just stared at the useless compass in her hand. In the distance, I heard something that might have been a wolf howl, or might have been something trying very hard to sound like a wolf. "We need to find shelter," Grace said finally. "Get out of the open, figure out what we're dealing with." "The old fire lookout," I said. "It's maybe 2 miles from here, up on Sentinel Ridge. Built in the 1960s, hasn't been used in years, but the structure should still be sound." Grace looked at me for a long moment, and I could see her weighing the options. Stay on the road and keep trying to reach the highway, knowing that the road seemed to be working against us, or head for the lookout and hole up until daylight. 2 miles, she said. "Maybe less. I've hiked up there a few times. It's steep, but we can make it on the snowmobiles if we're careful." She nodded slowly. "Okay, but Micah, if this turns out to be another trap, then we deal with it together." We rode up Sentinel Ridge with our headlights off, using the moonlight to navigate. It was slow going, and more than once I thought we were going to tip over on the steep slope. But eventually, the old fire lookout emerged from the darkness above us, a wooden tower rising 30 feet into the air, topped by a small cabin with windows on all sides. The tower looked abandoned and precarious, the kind of structure that most people would take one look at and decide to stay far away from. But to us, at that moment, it looked like salvation. We parked the snowmobiles at the base of the tower and climbed the wooden stairs, testing each step before putting our full weight on it. Some of the boards were rotten, others covered in ice, but we made it to the top without incident. The cabin door wasn't locked. Inside, it was dusty and cold, but the windows were intact and the structure seemed solid enough. There was an old pot-belly stove in one corner, a desk with maps still pinned to the walls, even a couple of cots with musty sleeping bags. Grace immediately went to the windows, looking out at the forest below. From up here, we could see for miles in every direction. The ranger station was visible in the distance, its lights still on. Beyond that, the dark expanse of the forest stretched to the horizon, broken only by the pale line of the frozen creek. "I don't see anyone," she said. "No lights, no movement. I checked my watch again. 2:14 a.m. 1 minute until the next alarm was supposed to go off, but the phone was still back at the ranger station, sitting on the desk where we'd left it. "Maybe it only works if we're close to it," Grace said, reading my thoughts. "Maybe whoever's doing this needs us within range to—" She stopped mid-sentence. Her hand went to her coat pocket, her face going pale. "Grace?" Slowly, she pulled something out of her pocket. The phone. The same iPhone we'd found in the creek, still showing that 100% battery. "That's not possible," I said. "We left it at the station. I saw you leave it on the desk." "I did leave it on the desk," Grace said, her voice shaking. "I swear to God, Micah, I left it there." But there it was, in her hand. And as we stared at it, the screen lit up and the alarm began to sound. 2:15 a.m., right on schedule. The alarm label glowed on the screen. North window. Grace and I turned to look at the northern window of the lookout cabin. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Just darkness, trees, the distant lights of the ranger station. Then I saw them. Lights in the forest. Not flashlights or headlamps, but something else. Small points of illumination, scattered through the trees like a constellation that had fallen to earth. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, spread out in a rough semicircle around the base of the lookout tower. "What are those?" Grace whispered. I grabbed a pair of old binoculars from the desk and focused on the nearest light. For a moment, I couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. Then it clicked. They were phones. Dozens of smartphones, propped up in the snow, their screens glowing in the darkness. And on every screen was the same image, the front of the fire lookout cabin, as seen from below, as seen from exactly where those phones were positioned. Someone had surrounded us with cameras. We were being watched from every angle by dozens of phones, all recording simultaneously. "We need to go," Grace said. "Right now. We take the snowmobiles and we punch through that perimeter and we don't stop until—" "Until what?" I interrupted. "Until we end up going in circles again? Until we crash in the dark? Grace, think about it. Whoever's doing this has been planning it for months, maybe years. They knew exactly where we'd be and when. They've got the roads blocked somehow. They've got cameras set up. They've got God knows what else waiting for us out there. So, what do you suggest? We just sit here and wait for them to come up?" "No," I said slowly, an idea forming in my mind. "We make them think we're doing exactly what they expect, but we do something else entirely." I explained my plan quickly. It wasn't great, but it was all we had. Grace listened, nodded, and we got to work. First, we positioned the sleeping bags on the cots to make it look like people were sleeping. It was a crude deception, but from a distance, especially through the grainy footage of phone cameras, it might buy us some time. Then we went out onto the catwalk that ran around the cabin, staying low and moving carefully to avoid being seen from below. The north side of the tower had a blind spot, a place where the angle was too steep for the phone cameras to cover. That's where we'd make our descent, but we weren't going to use the stairs. We'd be too exposed, too vulnerable. Instead, we'd rappel down the support beams of the tower using emergency rope from our packs. It was a risk, a serious one, but staying in the cabin was guaranteed to end badly. We rigged our ropes in silence, double-checking every knot, every anchor point. Grace went first, disappearing over the edge of the catwalk and sliding down into the darkness below. I watched for any sign that she'd been spotted, but the phones didn't react, their screens still showing the unchanging image of the cabin's front window. I went next, the rope burning through my gloved hands even as I tried to control my descent. The ground seemed impossibly far away, and every creak of the tower's old wood sounded like a gunshot in the quiet night. But then my feet touched snow, and Grace was there helping me untangle myself from the rope. We left the ropes hanging. Let whoever was watching think we were still in the cabin. Let them watch those sleeping bags and wonder why we weren't moving. The snowmobiles were on the opposite side of the tower from where we'd descended, and reaching them meant crossing through the perimeter of cameras. But Grace had noticed something I'd missed. All the phones were positioned facing the tower. If we moved outward, away from the tower, we'd be behind them, in their blind spots. We crawled through the snow on our bellies, moving with excruciating slowness. Every breath sounded too loud. Every movement kicked up too much powder. But we made it past the nearest phones, then the next row, then the next. When we finally reached the snowmobiles, I could hardly believe we'd made it. Grace was already on hers, key in the ignition. I climbed onto mine, inserted my key, and all the phones around us erupted with sound. Not alarms this time, but a voice. The same voice coming from every device simultaneously, creating a surround sound effect that made it impossible to determine where the speaker actually was. "Did you really think you could run?" the voice said. It was male, youngish, with an accent I couldn't quite place. "Did you think I wouldn't see you?" Grace gunned her engine in response, and I did the same. We took off down the slope, abandoning any attempt at stealth. The voice followed us, echoing from phones we couldn't see, hidden in the forest around us. "You're only making it worse for yourselves," the voice said. "I've been planning this for so long. You can't possibly understand how long, how carefully. Every detail, every contingency. I accounted for everything." We didn't stop, didn't slow down. The forest flashed past us in the moonlight, trees looming out of the darkness and disappearing behind us just as quickly. The voice kept talking, kept following us, but I forced myself to tune it out. Just focus on riding, on not crashing, on putting distance between us and whoever was out there. Then Grace's snowmobile hit something. A log, a rock, something hidden under the snow. She went flying, tumbling through the powder and slamming into a tree trunk with a sickening crunch. Her snowmobile flipped end over end and came to rest upside down, its engine still running, track spinning uselessly in the air. I killed my engine and ran to her. She was conscious but dazed, blood running down her forehead from a cut above her eye. "I'm okay," she said, though she clearly wasn't. "Get me up. We need to keep moving." I helped her to her feet, and that's when I saw it. About 50 yards away, a figure standing in the moonlight. Tall, wearing dark clothes, perfectly still, just watching us. More figures emerged from the trees, 5, 10, 15 of them, all dressed identically, all standing motionless, forming a circle around us. "Grace," I said quietly, "can you walk?" "I think so." Then we walk, straight through them. Don't stop, don't engage, we just walk. We moved forward, and the circle of figures moved with us, maintaining their distance. They didn't speak, didn't make any threatening gestures. They just walked when we walked, stopped when we stopped, like they were connected to us by invisible strings. Then one of them raised their hand, and I saw it was holding a phone. The screen lit up, showing a live video feed of us, of Grace and me, standing in the forest surrounded by figures. The same image was on all their phones now, dozens of screens showing us from every conceivable angle. "You're going to be famous," the voice said, coming from every phone simultaneously. "This is going to be the most viewed video in history. The ranger who walked into the forest and never came out. The perfect mystery, the perfect content." And suddenly, I understood. This wasn't about hurting us, not directly. It was about documentation, about creating a mystery that would captivate the internet, that would generate millions of views and endless speculation. We weren't victims. We were content. "No," I said firmly. The figures stopped moving. For the first time, I felt like I had their attention. "You want content?" I continued. "You want a mystery? Here's your ending. We walk out of here. We tell everyone what happened. We show them your faces, expose your whole operation. Your mystery ends with us testifying in court and you all going to prison. That's the content you're going to get." There was a long silence. Then, one by one, the phones went dark. The figures stood there for a moment longer, and then they began to retreat, melting back into the forest like they'd never been there at all. Grace and I didn't wait to see if they'd changed their minds. We got her snowmobile upright, miraculously still functional, and we rode. This time, when we headed for the main road, we found it exactly where it was supposed to be. The compass worked. The roads led where they should. By the time the sun came up, we were sitting in Sheriff Morrison's office giving our statements. By noon, deputies had returned to the ranger station and found it empty. The phone was gone. The cameras in the forest had vanished. There was no evidence that any of it had happened except for our testimony and the cut on Grace's forehead. They never caught whoever did it. The investigation went nowhere. The phone couldn't be traced, the alarms had no digital fingerprint, and none of the Forest Service's security cameras had captured anything unusual. Sometimes I wonder if we imagined the whole thing. If the isolation and the cold had gotten to us, made us see things that weren't there. But then I think about those alarms, set to the minute. About the voice in the darkness, talking about content and views and mysteries. And I think about the fact that somewhere out there someone is still watching, still planning, still waiting for the next person to walk into their carefully constructed trap. Grace quit the Forest Service 3 months later. Last I heard, she was teaching environmental science at a community college in Missoula. She doesn't return my calls. I'm still a ranger. I still work alone, still patrol the backcountry in winter. But I don't go to Sawmill Creek anymore. I don't go to Sentinel Ridge. And when I hear a phone alarm in the wilderness, I walk the other way. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some content is too dangerous to create. And some people are so determined to capture the perfect moment that they'll do anything, absolutely anything, to make it happen. The phone in the frozen creek wasn't a mistake or an accident. It was an invitation, and Grace and I were lucky enough to decline before we became permanent features of someone else's viral video. But I think about the next person who might not be so lucky, the next ranger who finds a phone where it shouldn't be, who follows the trail of alarms thinking they're solving a mystery instead of becoming one. I hope they're smarter than we were. I hope they run faster. The smell of fresh coffee in the middle of nowhere is not something you forget. It's wrong in a way that goes beyond simple surprise. Coffee means civilization, means someone waking up and going through the familiar morning ritual of grinding beans and boiling water. It means warmth and routine and human presence. Finding that smell in a fire lookout tower that's been abandoned for 3 decades is like hearing your name whispered in an empty room. I'm Rowan Schaffer, and I've been a ranger in the Bitterroot National Forest for 6 years now. 6 years of dealing with lost hikers, aggressive wildlife, illegal campers, and the occasional marijuana grow operation hidden deep in the backcountry. 6 years of learning that the forest has its own rhythms, its own rules, and that the smartest thing you can do is respect both. But nothing in those 6 years prepared me for what happened at the old Prospect Tower. It was late October, that peculiar time of year when Montana can't decide if it's still fall or already winter. The aspens had lost most of their leaves, leaving skeletal white branches against the gray sky. Snow had fallen in the high country but hadn't quite reached the middle elevations yet. The air had that crystalline quality that comes just before the first real freeze, when every sound seems sharper and every smell more distinct. I was on a routine patrol with Harper Boone, checking the backcountry campsites along the western boundary of the forest. Harper was relatively new to the service, only in his second season, but he had good instincts and didn't mind the long silences that came with wilderness patrol. Some rookies feel the need to fill every quiet moment with chatter, but Harper understood that sometimes the best thing you can do is shut up and pay attention. We'd been hiking for about 3 hours when I first smelled it. Coffee. Rich, dark, unmistakable. I stopped so abruptly that Harper nearly walked into my back. "You smell that?" I asked. Harper sniffed the air, his brow furrowing. "Coffee. Yeah." We both looked around. We were on a narrow trail that wound through dense lodgepole pine, about 7 miles from the nearest road. The closest campsite was 2 miles behind us, and we'd already checked it. Empty and undisturbed. There shouldn't have been anyone out here, let alone anyone brewing coffee. "Maybe there's a camp we don't know about," Harper suggested. "Someone set up off-trail." It was possible. We couldn't monitor every square foot of wilderness, and people occasionally set up illegal camps in remote areas. But something about the smell bothered me. It wasn't the faint aroma of someone's campfire coffee. It was strong, fresh, like someone had just poured a cup 10 feet away from us. "Come on," I said, stepping off the trail and following my nose. The smell led us uphill, through a thick stand of pine, and across a small meadow where frost still clung to the grass in the shadows. And then I saw it. Old Prospect Tower, rising above the tree line like a skeletal finger pointing at the sky. I'd seen the tower before, of course. Every ranger who worked this sector knew about it. Built in 1952, it had been one of the last fire lookouts constructed before the Forest Service started relying more on aerial surveillance. It had been decommissioned in 1987, deemed too expensive to maintain for the minimal fire risk in this particular area. Since then, it had just been standing here, slowly rotting away, a monument to a different era of forest management. The tower was about 50 feet tall, a wooden structure with a small cabin perched at the top. The stairs that spiraled around the outside looked treacherous, several steps missing or hanging at dangerous angles. Most of the windows in the cabin were broken, and the whole structure leaned slightly to the south, giving it a haunted, abandoned look that probably attracted more than its share of curious hikers and local teenagers looking for a place to drink beer and tell ghost stories. But the smell of coffee was definitely coming from up there. Harper and I exchanged a glance. "Could be squatters," he said quietly. "Could be, but I didn't think so. Squatters would have left other signs. A vehicle nearby, garbage, a trail of disturbed vegetation. The area around the tower looked untouched except for the deer trails that crisscrossed the clearing. "We should check it out," I said, though part of me wanted to turn around and pretend we'd never smelled anything. The stairs creaked ominously under our weight. I went first, testing each step before committing to it, very aware that a fall from this height would probably be fatal. Harper followed close behind, one hand on the railing, what was left of it, and the other on his radio. The smell of coffee got stronger as we climbed. By the time we reached the top platform, it was almost overwhelming, as if someone had just brewed an entire pot right in front of us. But when I peered through the broken window into the cabin, I saw no one. The door hung open on broken hinges. I pushed it wider and stepped inside, my hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on my belt even though I knew that bears didn't drink coffee. The cabin was a disaster. Years of weather had warped the floorboards and peeled the paint from the walls. The old fire finder, a circular device used to triangulate smoke locations, sat rusted and useless in the center of the room. Maps from the 1980s still hung on the walls, their paper yellowed and curling. A broken chair lay in one corner. Bird droppings covered most surfaces. But on the small table by the eastern window, perfectly centered and undisturbed by the debris around it, sat a white ceramic mug filled with coffee. I stared at it for a long moment, my brain trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The mug was clean, not spotless, but cleaner than anything else in the cabin, and the coffee inside it looked fresh, dark and opaque, with no film on the surface that would indicate it had been sitting for hours or days. Harper came up behind me. I heard his sharp intake of breath when he saw the mug. "Is that—" he started. "Don't touch it," I said, though he'd made no move to do so. I pulled a glove from my pocket and put it on, then picked up the mug carefully. The ceramic was cool to the touch, not warm like fresh coffee, but not ice cold either. Room temperature, if the room had been a comfortable 70 degrees instead of the 40-something it actually was. I brought the mug closer to my face and sniffed. The smell was definitely coming from this coffee, rich and dark with a hint of something else I couldn't quite identify. Vanilla, cinnamon, some kind of flavoring. "Someone was here recently," Harper said, looking around the cabin with wide eyes. "Had to be. That coffee can't be more than, what, an hour old?" I wanted to agree with him, but something was wrong. The cabin showed no signs of recent occupation except for this one mug of coffee. No footprints in the dust on the floor except ours. No disturbed debris. No sleeping bag, no backpack, no other evidence that anyone had been here. I set the mug back down on the table, exactly where I'd found it. "We need to search the area," I said. "Someone's out here, and they might need help." It was the logical explanation. A hiker had come up here, made coffee somehow. Maybe they had a small camping stove, and then left to explore or answer a call of nature. They'd be back soon, and we'd have a conversation about illegal camping and fire safety, issue a warning, and that would be that. But even as I thought this, I knew it didn't make sense. Where was the stove? Where were the coffee supplies, the water container, any of the equipment someone would need to brew coffee in an abandoned fire lookout? And why would someone go to the trouble of hiking all the way up here just to make a single cup of coffee and leave it behind? Harper and I spent the next 30 minutes searching the area around the tower. We walked in gradually widening circles, looking for any sign of recent human activity. We found nothing. No footprints except our own, no disturbed vegetation, no trash, no camping gear. It was as if the coffee had materialized out of thin air. "This doesn't make sense," Harper said when we met back at the base of the tower. He was trying to sound calm, but I could hear the unease in his voice. People don't just vanish, and coffee doesn't just appear. "No," I agreed. "They don't, and it doesn't." I pulled out my radio and called it into the ranger station. Dispatch was a woman named Rita, who'd been with the Forest Service longer than I'd been alive. If anyone had heard of weird occurrences at Old Prospect Tower, it would be her. "Dispatch, this is Schaffer. Over." "Go ahead, Schaffer." "We're at Old Prospect Tower on the western boundary. Found a mug of fresh coffee in the cabin, but no sign of who left it. We've searched the immediate area with negative results. Has anyone reported missing hikers in this sector? Over." There was a long pause. Then, negative on missing persons. "You said fresh coffee?" Affirmative. Less than an hour old by the smell, but the mug was cool to touch. No other signs of occupation. Over. Another pause. Longer this time. When Rita came back on, her voice had changed slightly. More serious. "Schaffer, I need you to mark that location and clear the area. Do not, I repeat, do not enter that structure again. Return to the station for debriefing. Over." I exchanged a glance with Harper. Rita's tone was wrong. She sounded almost frightened. "Copy that, dispatch. Can you provide context? Over." "Not over the radio. Just get back here. Dispatch out." The radio went silent. Harper looked at me, his face pale. "What was that about?" "I don't know, but when Rita sounds worried, we should probably listen." We marked the location on our GPS and started the hike back to the ranger station. It took us almost 4 hours, and the whole time I couldn't stop thinking about that mug of coffee sitting on the table, about the way it had been perfectly centered, like someone had placed it there with great care, about the smell, impossibly fresh in a building that hadn't been occupied in decades. And I kept thinking about Rita's voice, the way it had gone flat and serious when I mentioned the coffee. She knew something she didn't want to say over the radio. The ranger station was a squat log building that served as the administrative hub for the western sector of Bitterroot National Forest. By the time Harper and I arrived, the sun was setting and the temperature was dropping fast. Rita was waiting for us in the main office, along with the sector supervisor, a grizzled veteran named Thomas Kowalski. Kowalski was a man of few words, the kind of ranger who believed that if you had to talk a lot, you probably weren't paying enough attention to what was actually happening in the forest. The fact that he was here after hours meant this was serious. "Tell me exactly what you found," he said, without preamble. I described everything: the smell of coffee on the trail, following it to the tower, finding the mug in the cabin, the lack of any other evidence. Harper corroborated the story, adding details I'd forgotten. Kowalski listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When we finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to Rita. "Pull the file." Rita nodded and disappeared into the back office. Kowalski gestured for us to sit down. "What you found today," he said slowly, "isn't the first time something like this has happened at Old Prospect Tower." Harper leaned forward in his chair. "What do you mean?" "I mean that tower has a history, a bad one." Kowalski rubbed his face, suddenly looking every one of his 60-some years. "It's not something we advertise. Most of the newer rangers don't know about it. But everyone who's worked this sector long enough has heard the stories." Rita returned with a thick manila folder. She set it on the desk in front of Kowalski, who opened it and began pulling out documents: incident reports, search and rescue logs, photographs. Old Prospect Tower was decommissioned in 1987. Kowalski began. "But that's not the whole story. The reason it was decommissioned was because of what happened to the last person stationed there." He pulled out a photograph and turned it to face us. It showed a man in his early 30s wearing a Forest Service uniform and smiling at the camera. He had dark hair and a beard, and he looked like every other ranger I'd ever met: competent, outdoorsy, comfortable in his own skin. "This is Michael Reeves," Kowalski said. "He was the fire lookout at Old Prospect during the summer of 1987. He was experienced, well-trained, and by all accounts loved the isolation of the job. He'd requested the position specifically." "What happened to him?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to know. "He vanished. Sometime in late August, communication from the tower stopped. His regular check-ins stopped. His weather reports stopped. Everything. After 3 days of silence, the Forest Service sent a team to investigate." Kowalski pulled out another document: an incident report dated August 28, 1987. They found the tower empty. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication of what happened. Most of Reeves' belongings were still there: his clothes, his books, his radio equipment. But Reeves himself was gone. "Maybe he just left," Harper suggested. "Decided he'd had enough and hiked out. That's what they thought at first, but his truck was still at the trailhead. His wallet and ID were still in the cabin, and there was something else. Kowalski pulled out a photograph, this one showing the interior of the fire lookout cabin. It looked much cleaner than what Harper and I had seen, obviously taken before decades of abandonment had taken their toll. On the table, clearly visible in the photograph, sat a white ceramic mug. They found his coffee, Kowalski said quietly. Still on the table, like he'd just poured it and set it down. The mug was cold, but the coffee inside still smelled fresh. The team that investigated said it was the strangest thing they'd ever seen. The room was very quiet. I could hear the old building settling, the wind outside, the hum of the refrigerator in the break room. But mostly, I heard the silence that comes when people realize they're dealing with something they don't understand. They searched for Reeves for 3 weeks, Kowalski continued. Brought in dogs, volunteers, even a helicopter when the budget allowed. Covered hundreds of square miles. Never found a trace of him, not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, nothing. It was like he'd stepped out of the cabin and vanished into thin air. And that's why the tower was decommissioned? I asked. Officially, it was decommissioned for budget reasons. But yeah, the real reason was that no one wanted to work there after Reeves disappeared. The Forest Service tried to assign a new lookout the following summer, but the person quit after 3 days. Said they kept hearing things, smelling things that shouldn't be there. After that, they just shut the place down. Rita had been quiet through all of this, but now she spoke up. That's not the end of the story, though. Tell them about the others. Kowalski nodded grimly. Over the years since the tower was abandoned, we've had 4 separate incidents involving that location. Always the same pattern. Someone goes up to the tower, reports finding a mug of fresh coffee, and then shortly after, someone goes missing. Wait, Harper said. You're saying the coffee is some kind of warning? A sign that someone's about to disappear? I'm not saying anything, Kowalski replied. I'm just telling you what's in the reports. In '92, a group of hikers went up to the tower. They found coffee, reported it to us. 2 days later, one of them disappeared while hiking alone in the same area. Never found. He pulled out more documents. 1998, a mountain biker found coffee at the tower. A week later, another biker went missing on a nearby trail. Found his bike, but never found him. 2003. Couple of hunters exploring the area found coffee. One of them vanished 3 days later while hunting alone. His partner said he was there 1 minute, gone the next. Massive search operation, nothing. And the last one was in 2011. A ranger, not from this station but from the eastern sector, was doing a long-range patrol. He stopped at the tower, found coffee, radioed it in. 2 days later, he didn't show up for his next scheduled check-in. They found his campsite all set up, fire still smoldering, but no sign of him. Kowalski closed the folder. Now you understand why Rita was concerned when you radioed in. That tower is bad news. We've been lucky that most people don't know about it, so we don't get many visitors, but every few years, someone stumbles across it, and the pattern repeats. I felt cold, and not from the dropping temperature outside. So, what are you saying? That finding the coffee means someone's going to disappear? I'm saying that there's a correlation we can't explain. I'm saying that every time someone finds fresh coffee in that tower, someone vanishes within days. And I'm saying that you and Harper need to be extremely careful for the next week or so. Don't patrol alone. Don't wander off the marked trails, and if anything at all feels wrong, you get on the radio immediately. Harper looked shaken. This is insane. There has to be a logical explanation. Someone's playing a prank, or you think we haven't considered that? Rita interrupted. You think the Forest Service hasn't investigated every possibility? We've had law enforcement involved. We've had psychologists. We've had everyone we could think of trying to figure this out, and none of them have found anything. Then what do you think is happening? I asked Kowalski directly. He was quiet for a long moment. I think that there are things in the wilderness that we don't understand. I think that this forest is older and stranger than we give it credit for. And I think that whatever is happening at that tower has been happening for a long time, probably longer than we've been keeping records. He stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Go home. Get some rest. And remember what I said. Stay together. Stay alert. Stay safe. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Michael Reeves, about the photograph of him smiling in his Forest Service uniform, about the coffee mug sitting on the table 3 decades later, still impossibly fresh. I thought about the 4 other people who disappeared, about the pattern that made no sense but was too consistent to ignore. And I thought about something Kowalski hadn't mentioned in his briefing, something I'd noticed in the incident reports. In every case, the person who disappeared wasn't the person who found the coffee. It was always someone else, someone nearby but not present at the actual discovery. The hikers in Natu, the person who disappeared wasn't one of the group who found the coffee. It was someone who'd been camping in the same area. The mountain biker in '98, it was a different biker, someone who'd been riding the same trail system. The hunters in 2003, one found the coffee, the other disappeared. And the ranger in 2011, he found the coffee, but it was a civilian hiker who vanished from a nearby trail, which meant the pattern wasn't find coffee, disappear. It was find coffee, someone near you disappears. I sat up in bed, my heart racing. If the pattern held, Harper and I weren't in danger, but someone else was. Someone who'd been near Old Prospect Tower when we were there. Someone who might not even know they were at risk. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 3 a.m. Too early to call Kowalski, but not too early to start going through my notes. Harper and I had seen no one else during our patrol, but that didn't mean no one had been there. The forest is vast, and it's easy to pass within 100 yards of someone and never know it. When dawn finally broke, I was already dressed and drinking my 3rd cup of coffee. I drove to the ranger station before my shift officially started, finding Kowalski already there, looking like he'd slept about as well as I had. I need to see those incident reports again, I said, without preamble. He didn't argue, just pulled out the folder and handed it to me. I spread the documents across the table and started making notes, looking for any detail I'd missed during the briefing. You noticed, Kowalski said. It wasn't a question. The pattern, it's not the person who finds the coffee who disappears. It's someone else, someone nearby. Yeah, I didn't want to spell it out last night because I didn't want to start a panic. But you're right. The coffee seems to be a marker, a sign that someone in the area is about to vanish, not necessarily the person who discovers it. So we need to figure out who else was near the tower yesterday. We need to warn them. With what information? Kowalski asked. Think about how that conversation goes. Excuse me, we found a mysterious mug of coffee in an abandoned fire lookout, and based on a pattern of unexplained disappearances over the last 30 years, we think you might be in danger. People will think we've lost our minds. He had a point, but that didn't change the situation. We have to try. We can check the trail registers, see if anyone else signed in for that area. We can put out an alert to other ranger stations, ask if anyone's reported unusual activity. Already done, Kowalski said. I've been up since 4. Checked all the registers. No one else signed in for that area in the past week. Put out alerts to adjacent forests, asked if they've had any strange reports. So far, nothing. What about Harper? He called in sick this morning. Said he didn't sleep, feeling too anxious to work. I told him to take the day, get his head straight. That didn't sit right with me. Harper had seemed shaken last night, But he'd also seemed like the kind of person who dealt with stress by working, not by staying home. You think he's okay? I think he's spooked. Can't blame him. Kowalski rubbed his eyes. Look, Schaffer, I'm going to be straight with you. In all the previous incidents, there's been one other common factor I didn't mention last night. I felt my stomach drop. What factor? The person who disappeared was always someone who was alone. The hikers in '92, the one who vanished had split off from the group for a solo day hike. The bikers in '98, the victim had gone riding alone. The hunter in 2003, a solo hunting trip while his partner stayed at camp. The ranger in 2011, the civilian who vanished was hiking alone. You're saying that as long as people stay together, they're safe. I'm saying that's what the pattern suggests, which is why I told Harper to take the day off. As long as he's at home, presumably with other people around, he should be fine. And why I'm telling you right now that you're not going on patrol alone today. If you go out, someone goes with you. I should have felt reassured, but something was bothering me. Harper lives alone. He told me that when we first started working together. He's got an apartment in town, lives by himself. Kowalski's face went pale. You're sure? Positive. He mentioned it when we were talking about housing costs, how expensive it was to rent alone, but how he liked the privacy. Shit. Kowalski grabbed his radio. Harper, this is Kowalski. Respond. Over. Static. Harper, if you're receiving this, respond immediately. Over. More static. Kowalski tried Harper's cell phone. It rang 6 times before going to voicemail. He tried twice more with the same result. Then he grabbed his jacket. We're going to his apartment, right now. The drive into town took 20 minutes, every one of which felt like an hour. Kowalski drove while I tried Harper's phone over and over, getting voicemail every time. We tried to convince ourselves that he was just sleeping, that he'd turned off his phone to get some rest, that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for why he wasn't answering. But we both knew better. Harper's apartment was in a small complex on the edge of town, the kind of generic building that could be anywhere in America. His truck was in the parking lot, which should have been a good sign, but somehow it just made me more nervous. Kowalski knocked on the door. Harper, it's Kowalski. Open up. No response. He knocked again, harder this time. Harper Boone, this is your supervisor. I need you to open this door. Still nothing. I'm going to call the police, I said, pulling out my phone. Wait. Kowalski tried the doorknob. It was unlocked. We looked at each other. Every instinct said we should wait for law enforcement, but every instinct also said we didn't have time. Kowalski pushed the door open. Harper, we're coming in. The apartment was small and neat, exactly what I would have expected from Harper. Living room with a couch and TV, small kitchen, hallway leading to what was probably the bedroom and bathroom. Everything was in order. No signs of struggle, no indication of anything wrong. Harper, I called out, moving into the hallway. The bedroom door was open. The bed was made, hadn't been slept in. The bathroom was empty. I checked the closet. Harper's ranger uniform was hanging there, his work boots lined up below it. He's not here, I said, though it was obvious. Kowalski was standing in the living room looking at the coffee table. On it sat a white ceramic mug, identical to the ones we'd seen at the tower. The mug was half full of coffee, and it smelled fresh. I felt the world tilt sideways. This was impossible. The coffee at the tower was one thing, strange and unsettling, but at least confined to that one location. But this? In Harper's apartment, miles away from the forest. He left this morning, I said, thinking out loud. He called in sick, which means he was here at some point. He made coffee. No. Kowalski's voice was flat. Harper doesn't drink coffee. He's one of those weirdos who drinks tea. I've never seen him with coffee, not once. We stared at the mug. The coffee inside it was dark and perfectly still, and it smelled exactly like the coffee we'd found at the tower. Rich, dark, with that hint of vanilla or cinnamon or whatever it was. "We need to call this in," Kowalski said. "Missing person, possible abduction. Get the police involved, get a proper investigation going." But I was looking at something else. On the floor, next to the couch, was Harper's backpack, the one he used for patrol. And sticking out of the top was a topographic map with the western sector of Bitterroot National Forest clearly marked. I pulled out the map and spread it on the coffee table. Someone had drawn on it with a red marker, circling Old Prospect Tower. And from that circle, a line extended north into an area labeled Prospect Creek Canyon. "He went back," I said. "Harper went back to the tower." "Why the hell would he do that?" "Because he wanted answers. Because he's 25 and stubborn, and he thought he could figure out what's happening." I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. We told him to stay home and stay safe, but we didn't explain the pattern clearly enough. He didn't understand that the danger wasn't at the tower itself. It was... I stopped, because I'd just realized something. The pattern wasn't about location, it was about connection. Every person who'd disappeared had been connected to the person who found the coffee. The hikers had been part of the same group. The bikers had been using the same trail. The hunters had been partners. The ranger and the civilian had been in the same area. Harper and I had found the coffee together. We'd both been at the tower, both touched the mug, both breathed in that strange, impossible smell. We were connected, which meant the threat wasn't to someone random who happened to be nearby. It was to one of us, Harper or me. And based on every other incident, the person in danger was the one who left, the one who went off alone. Harper had gone off alone. "We have to find him," I said urgently. "Right now. He went to Prospect Creek Canyon. Look at the map. He marked a route. He's planning to search the area north of the tower." Kowalski was already on his radio, calling for backup. "All units, we have a possible lost ranger in the Prospect Creek Canyon area. I repeat, Ranger Harper Boone is potentially missing in Prospect Creek Canyon. All available personnel respond for search and rescue operations." While he coordinated the response, I studied the map. Prospect Creek Canyon was rough territory, all steep slopes and dense forest. In October, with the weather turning, it would be especially dangerous. If Harper was up there alone, he was at risk even without whatever mysterious force seemed to be hunting people near Old Prospect Tower. "I'm going after him," I said. "Right now. I can be at the trailhead in 30 minutes. "Not alone, you're not," Kowalski said firmly. "The whole point is that people who go alone disappear. You wait for backup. We don't have time. Every other disappearance happened within days of finding the coffee. But Harper's been gone for hours, and we've got daylight for maybe 8 more hours at most. If we wait for a full search and rescue team to assemble, it'll be dark before we even start looking." Kowalski looked torn. Every rule of ranger safety said you don't go into dangerous terrain alone, especially not when you're already spooked and possibly not thinking clearly. But every instinct said that Harper was running out of time. "Take someone with you," he said finally. "Anyone. Grab Rita. Grab one of the other rangers. Hell, grab a volunteer if you have to. But you do not go up there alone. That's an order." I nodded and ran for my truck. On the drive back to the ranger station, I called everyone I could think of, trying to find someone who could drop everything and come on a potentially dangerous rescue hike with 0 notice. No one was available. The other rangers were already on patrol, too far away to help. The volunteers were at work. Rita was needed at the station to coordinate the response. By the time I reached the ranger station, I'd made my decision. I was going alone. It violated direct orders. It went against every safety protocol we had, but Harper was my partner, and he was in trouble because of something we'd discovered together. I couldn't wait while he was up there, possibly injured, possibly worse. I grabbed my pack, loaded it with emergency supplies, and headed for my truck. Kowalski saw me through the window and came running out. "Schaffer, who's going with you?" "No one's available," I said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Then you wait. That's an order." "I can't wait. Harper could be... If you go up there alone, you could disappear too. And then we'd have 2 missing rangers instead of 1. Or Harper could be lying at the bottom of a ravine with a broken leg, and every minute we wait makes his chances worse." I pulled open my truck door. "I'm going, sir. Fire me if you want, but I'm going." Kowalski stared at me for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "Fine. But you take a radio and you check in every 30 minutes, and if you're not back by dark, I'm sending in the cavalry. Every ranger, volunteer, and cop we can muster." "Fair enough." "And Schaffer, be careful. Whatever's happening up there, just be careful." I drove to the trailhead that accessed Prospect Creek Canyon, my mind racing the whole way. Harper's map had shown a route that branched off from the main trail about 2 miles in, heading north toward a series of ridges that overlooked the canyon. It was rough country, the kind of place where cell phones didn't work, and one wrong step could send you tumbling down a 100-foot slope. The trailhead parking lot was empty except for one vehicle. Harper's truck. Finding Harper's truck confirmed what I already knew, but it still made my chest tight with worry. He'd been here, maybe 4 or 5 hours ago based on when he'd called in sick. He'd hiked up alone, into terrain that was difficult in the best circumstances and potentially deadly in the worst. I grabbed my pack and started up the trail at a fast pace, not quite jogging, but close to it. The afternoon sun filtered through the pines, creating that peculiar autumn light that makes everything look both beautiful and slightly unreal. Under different circumstances, this would have been a pleasant hike, but knowing that Harper was somewhere up ahead, possibly in danger, turned every peaceful aspect of the forest into something menacing. I called out as I hiked, "Harper! Harper Boone!" My voice echoed off the slopes and disappeared into the forest. No response. The trail climbed steadily, switching back and forth across the face of a ridge. According to Harper's map, the turnoff would be coming up soon, marked by a distinctive lightning-struck pine that was visible from the main trail. I kept my eyes open, calling Harper's name every few minutes, pausing to listen for any response. Nothing but wind and the occasional distant cry of a raven. I found the lightning-struck pine right where the map indicated. From here, a faint game trail led north, barely visible through the underbrush. This was where Harper would have left the main trail, heading into more remote territory. I paused long enough to radio the station. "Kowalski, this is Schaffer. I'm at the lightning-struck pine about to head north on the game trail. Harper's truck is at the trailhead. Over." "Copy that, Schaffer. How's the weather looking? Over." I glanced up at the sky. Clouds were building to the west, gray and heavy. "Might get some precipitation before nightfall. Over." "Understood. You've got maybe 6 hours of good daylight left. If you haven't found him by then, you come back. No heroics. Over." "Copy. Checking in again in 30, Schaffer out." The game trail was rough going. It hadn't been maintained. It was just a path created by deer and elk moving through the forest, and it was barely wide enough for a person. Branches grabbed at my jacket, and more than once I had to climb over fallen logs that blocked the way. But there were signs that Harper had come this way. A broken branch here, a boot print in a patch of soft earth there. He'd been moving fast, not being careful about covering his tracks. That worried me. Harper was experienced enough to know that you don't rush in rough terrain. Not unless you're running from something, or running towards something urgently. After about 45 minutes of hiking, the game trail emerged onto a rocky outcrop that overlooked Prospect Creek Canyon. It was a stunning view. The canyon stretched out below, maybe 800 feet deep, with a silver thread of creek visible at the bottom. The far wall was all broken cliffs and scattered pine trees clinging to impossible angles. And there, sitting on a flat rock near the edge of the outcrop, was Harper. Relief flooded through me. Harper! He didn't turn around, didn't react at all. Just sat there looking down into the canyon. I approached cautiously, that relief already starting to curdle into something else. Something was wrong. Harper's posture was too still, too rigid, like a mannequin someone had positioned there. Harper? I said again, quieter this time. You okay? Finally, he turned to look at me. His face was pale, and his eyes had a strange, distant quality. Rowan, he said, and his voice sounded flat, empty. You shouldn't have come. Everyone's worried about you. You were supposed to stay home, stay safe. What are you doing up here? I had to come back, he said, turning to look at the canyon again. I had to understand. Understand what? The coffee, the pattern, all of it. He gestured vaguely at the canyon. It's beautiful, isn't it? So peaceful. I sat down next to him, carefully, keeping a few feet of distance. Up close, I could see that he looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, his hands trembling slightly. How long have you been sitting here? I don't know. A while. I came up to search for... I don't remember. What was I searching for? That sent a chill down my spine. Harper, listen to me. We need to get you back to the station. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly, he said. But there was no conviction in his voice. I'm just tired, so tired. I think I might rest here for a while. No, we're leaving, right now. I stood up and held out my hand. Come on your feet. Harper looked at my hand for a long moment, then at the canyon, then back at my hand. Do you know what I realized, Rowan? After we found that coffee? What? That we don't know anything. We think we understand the forest, we think we understand nature, but we don't. We're just visitors here, temporary. The forest was here long before us, and it'll be here long after. And sometimes it takes people back. Takes them back where? Into itself. Into the trees and the earth and the water. Back to where we came from. He smiled, and it was the saddest smile I'd ever seen. Michael Reeves understood. That's why he didn't run. That's why he just left his coffee on the table and walked into the forest. You don't know that. You're guessing. I'm not guessing. I know. Harper tapped his temple. I know, because I can feel it. It's been calling me since yesterday, since we found the coffee. At first it was just a whisper, barely noticeable, but it's getting louder, and now... He trailed off, staring into the canyon. I grabbed his arm. Harper, listen to me. You're experiencing some kind of psychological episode. Maybe exposure, maybe stress, maybe something else. But you're not thinking rationally. We're going to get you back to the station, get you checked out by a doctor, and figure this out. He pulled his arm away, not roughly but firmly. I'm not going back. Yes, you are. Even if I have to drag you. You won't drag me, because you feel it too, don't you? He looked at me with those strange, distant eyes. You've been hearing it since we left the tower yesterday. A voice, almost too quiet to hear, calling you, inviting you. You just haven't admitted it to yourself yet. I opened my mouth to deny it, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. There had been something. A faint whisper at the edge of my awareness. I'd dismissed it as anxiety, as my imagination running wild after hearing Kowalski's stories. But it had been there, constant and patient, like someone calling my name from another room. "It's not real," I said, more to myself than to Harper. "It's just our minds playing tricks, stress and fear and suggestion." "Then why is it getting louder?" Harper asked. "Why can I hear it so clearly now, telling me exactly where to go, exactly what to do? What's it telling you to do?" He stood up, and for a moment I thought he was going to step off the edge of the outcrop, plunge into the canyon below. But instead he turned and pointed into the forest. "It's telling me to go north, to keep walking until I find the place where the creek forks. There's something there, something important." "Harper, there's nothing there, it's just forest. You're confused. Come with me," he said. "Just come with me and see. If I'm wrong, if there's nothing there, then I'll come back with you. I'll get checked out by a doctor. I'll do whatever you want. But I need to see, I need to know." Every instinct told me this was a bad idea, that following Harper deeper into the forest away from the trail would end badly for both of us. But I also knew that if I let him go alone, I'd never see him again. He'd disappear just like Michael Reeves, just like all the others, and I couldn't let that happen. "Okay," I said. "But we stay together. You don't go ahead, you don't wander off. We walk side by side, and at the first sign of danger, we turn around. Deal?" "Deal," Harper said, and started walking. We left the overlook and headed north, deeper into the forest. The terrain became increasingly difficult. Steep slopes covered in loose scree, thick underbrush that caught at our clothes, fallen logs that we had to climb over or navigate around. Harper moved with a strange single-mindedness, never hesitating, never checking the map or GPS. He just walked, as if he knew exactly where he was going. And the whole time, that whisper at the edge of my awareness grew louder. It wasn't exactly a voice, more like a feeling, a pull, like a gentle hand guiding me forward. It felt almost welcoming, almost comforting, like coming home after a long journey. Part of me recognized this as dangerous, as the same thing that was affecting Harper. But another part of me, a part I didn't want to acknowledge, wanted to follow it, wanted to see where it led. We hiked for maybe an hour, though time felt strange and elastic. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows through the trees. I tried to keep track of our position, to mark landmarks that would help us find our way back, but everything started to look the same. Pine trees and rocks and slopes that all blended together. Then Harper stopped abruptly. "There," he said, pointing. Ahead of us, the forest opened into a small clearing, and in the center of that clearing was a structure, or what was left of one. It looked like it had been a cabin once, but time and weather had reduced it to just a few standing walls and a collapsed roof. Moss covered everything, and small trees grew up through what had been the floor. "That's not on any map," I said, pulling out my GPS. The screen showed our position in the middle of unmarked forest. No buildings, no historical sites, nothing. "How did you know this was here?" "It told me," Harper said simply, and walked toward the ruins. I followed, my hand instinctively moving to the bear spray on my belt. The clearing felt wrong somehow, too quiet. No bird sounds, no wind, just an oppressive silence that seemed to absorb sound rather than amplify it. The cabin, or what remained of it, was small, maybe 15 feet by 15 feet. One wall still had a window frame, though the glass was long gone. The doorway was empty, just a dark opening into the interior. Harper walked right through that doorway without hesitation. I paused at the threshold, every survival instinct screaming at me not to enter. But I couldn't let Harper go in alone. The interior was dark despite the holes in the roof. My eyes needed a moment to adjust, and when they did, I saw that the floor was covered in dead leaves and forest debris. But in one corner, someone had cleared a space, and in that cleared space sat a white ceramic mug. Fresh coffee. I could smell it even from the doorway. "Harper," I said carefully, "we need to leave right now." But Harper was walking toward the mug, drawn to it like a moth to a flame. "It's been waiting," he said, "all this time, waiting for someone to come back." "Come back from where?" "Harper, you're not making sense." He picked up the mug, cradling it in both hands like it was something precious. "Michael Reeves," he said. "He came here after he left the tower. This is where he went." "How do you know that?" "Because it's all connected. The tower, this place, the coffee, it's all connected." He looked at me, and his eyes were clearer than they'd been since I found him at the Overlook. "Rowan, I understand now. I understand what's happening." "Then explain it to me." "The coffee isn't a warning. It's an invitation. Someone, something, wants us here. Has been inviting people here for decades, and the ones who accept the invitation," he gestured around the ruined cabin, "they end up here. That doesn't make sense. Why? Who would—" I stopped talking because I heard something. Footsteps. Someone was outside the cabin, walking around it in a slow circle. The same pattern we'd heard at the ranger station 2 nights ago. Harper heard it too. He set down the coffee mug carefully and moved to the window. I joined him, peering out into the clearing. There was no one there. The footsteps continued, clearly audible, but the clearing was empty. Just trees and afternoon shadows and that oppressive silence. "It's here," Harper whispered. "It's always been here." The footsteps stopped. For a moment, everything was perfectly still. Then, from the doorway behind us, a voice spoke. "Hello, Harper. Hello, Rowan." We spun around. Standing in the doorway, backlit by the afternoon sun, was a figure in a Forest Service uniform. As my eyes adjusted, I saw who it was. Michael Reeves, looking exactly like he had in the photograph from 1987. Not a day older, still young and fit, still wearing his ranger uniform with his name tag clearly visible. "You can't be real," I said. "Michael Reeves has been missing for 30 years. "Missing," he repeated, and smiled. "Is that what they're calling it? I suppose that's accurate. I did miss quite a lot." He stepped into the cabin, and I noticed he wasn't walking on the debris-covered floor. His feet passed through the leaves without disturbing them. "You're a ghost," Harper said, and he didn't sound frightened, just tired. "You died here." "I didn't die," Reeves corrected gently. "I transformed. There's a difference." He moved closer, and I could see now that he was translucent, like looking at someone through dirty glass. "This place, it's a threshold, a doorway, between the forest as you know it and the forest as it truly is." "That doesn't make sense," I said, but even as I spoke, I knew we'd gone beyond sense, beyond rational explanation. "The forest is old," Reeves said. "Older than humans, older than civilization, and it remembers. It remembers when we were part of it, when we lived in harmony with it instead of trying to control it. Every so often, it reaches out, invites someone back, to become part of it again." "The coffee," Harper said. "That's the invitation. Yes, a familiar ritual, something human and comforting. Coffee in the morning, coffee during a long watch. It's a kindness, really, a gentle way of asking if you're ready to come home." "And if we refuse?" I asked. Reeves looked sad. "Then you leave. Go back to your stations and your patrols and your human lives. The forest doesn't force anyone, it only invites. But the people who disappeared accepted the invitation, chose to become part of something greater than themselves." He smiled. I made my choice 30 years ago, and I've never regretted it. I watch the birds and the seasons change. I exist in harmony with everything around me. No more fear, no more pain. Just peace. Harper was nodding slowly, and I realized with horror that he was buying into this, that he was actually considering accepting an invitation from what was apparently the ghost of a missing ranger offering transformation into, what, a tree spirit? A forest ghost? No, I said firmly, grabbing Harper's arm. We're not doing this. We're walking out of here right now, and we're never coming back. Rowan, Harper started. No, this is crazy. You're not thinking clearly. You're exhausted and stressed, and something, probably carbon monoxide or toxic mold or something, is making you hallucinate. We're leaving. I pulled Harper toward the door, past the translucent figure of Michael Reeves, out into the clearing. The sun was lower now, maybe 2 hours until dark. We needed to move fast if we were going to make it back to the trailhead before nightfall. But Harper resisted, pulling against my grip. Wait a moment, let me think. There's nothing to think about. We're going, now. What if he's right, though? Harper looked back at the cabin where Reeves stood in the doorway, watching us with that sad, patient expression. What if there is something better out there? Something beyond all the stress and fear and uncertainty? Then you can come back and find it some other day, when you're thinking clearly, when you haven't been up all night and hiking alone and clearly suffering from some kind of exposure. I softened my voice. Please, Harper, come back with me. Let's get you checked out. Let's make sure you're okay. And if you still want to come back here after that, I won't stop you. Harper looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Reeves. Then at the forest around us, dark and deep and ancient. Okay, he said finally. Okay, let's go. The hike back was a nightmare. Night fell faster than I expected, and we had to use our headlamps to navigate the game trail. Harper moved like he was in a daze, and I had to constantly guide him, keep him from stumbling over roots or walking off the trail entirely. And the whole way, I could feel something watching us, following us. The invitation had been extended and declined, and I had the distinct impression that the forest wasn't happy about it. We reached the main trail just as my headlamp battery started to die. Harper's truck was still the only vehicle in the parking lot. No rescue party yet, though I knew they'd be coming soon. I got Harper into my truck and radioed the station. Kowalski, this is Schaffer. I've got Harper. We're at the Prospect Creek trailhead. He's alive but needs medical attention. Over. The relief in Kowalski's voice was palpable. Copy that. Ambulance is on the way, should be there in 15. What happened? Over. I looked at Harper, who was sitting in the passenger seat with his eyes closed, looking more peaceful than he had all day. Long story. I'll explain when we get back. Schaffer out. The ambulance arrived, checked Harper out, and took him to the hospital for observation. Kowalski met me at the ranger station, and I told him everything. The cabin, the coffee, Michael Reeves, all of it. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. You know how insane that sounds, he said finally. I know, but it happened, all of it. Harper's going to need time off, probably a lot of it, and a psychiatric evaluation before he can come back to work. I know that too. Kowalski rubbed his face. This forest. Sometimes I think it's more alive than we want to admit, more aware, and every so often, it reminds us that we're visitors here, temporary, that it was here first and it'll be here last. So what do we do about the tower, about that cabin, about all of it? We mark them off limits, put up warning signs, hope people listen. He looked at me. You're okay, though? You're not hearing any invitations? I thought about it. Thought about that whisper that had been at the edge of my awareness all day. It was quieter now, fainter, but it wasn't entirely gone. "I'm fine," I said. Because what else could I say? Harper recovered eventually. The doctors said he'd suffered from exhaustion and dehydration and possibly mild hypothermia. They found no evidence of hallucinations or psychological breakdown. No trace of drugs or toxins in his system. Nothing that could explain what we'd experienced except stress and the power of suggestion. The official report cited environmental exposure and recommended mandatory rest periods for rangers working extended patrols. After a few weeks of medical leave, Harper returned to work. But he wasn't the same. The easy confidence he'd had before was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that never quite settled. He requested a transfer to the eastern sector within his first week back, as far from Old Prospect Tower as he could get while still working in Bitterroot. Kowalski approved it without question. The last time I saw Harper was 3 months after the incident. We crossed paths at a regional training session in Missoula. He looked thinner, older somehow, though barely any time had passed. When our eyes met across the conference room, I saw something in his expression that made my chest tighten. Recognition. Understanding. The look of someone who'd seen behind the curtain and couldn't quite forget what was there. During a break, he pulled me aside. We stood in the parking lot, both of us pretending to check our phones, not quite looking at each other. "Do you still hear it?" he asked quietly. I didn't need to ask what he meant. Sometimes, mostly at night. You, every day. He finally looked at me, and I saw dark circles under his eyes that no amount of sleep would fix. It's quieter now than it was, but it never completely goes away, like tinnitus, but for your soul. "Have you talked to anyone about it? A therapist, maybe?" He laughed, short and bitter. "And say what? That the forest is calling me? That I can feel something ancient and patient waiting for me to come back? They'd have my badge so fast." He paused. Some nights I wake up and I'm halfway to my truck before I realize what I'm doing. "It wants me back, Rowan. It hasn't given up." "You can't go back," I said firmly. "You know what happens to people who accept." "Do I?" Michael Reeves looked happy, peaceful. More at peace than I've been since we found that first cup of coffee. He shook his head. "I'm not saying I'm going to do anything stupid, but I understand now why people don't come back. Why they just walk into the forest and never return. Because it offers something we don't have anymore. Connection, purpose, a sense of belonging to something larger than ourselves. It's not real, Harper. It's manipulation, some kind of psychological phenomenon we don't understand yet, but it's not—" "How do you know?" he interrupted. "How do you know it's not real? We found coffee that shouldn't exist. We saw a man who disappeared 30 years ago. We felt something calling us. Just because we can't explain it doesn't mean it isn't real." I had no answer for that. We stood in uncomfortable silence until the break ended and duty called us back inside. I never saw Harper again after that day. 6 months later, I heard he'd quit the Forest Service entirely, moved to Seattle, got a job in tech, surrounded himself with concrete and glass and the constant buzz of humanity. Last I heard, he was doing okay, or at least, that's what he told people. I never went back to that area of the forest. Kowalski had the entire northwestern quadrant marked off limits for infrastructure assessment, which was bureaucratic speak for something happened here that we don't want to explain. Old Prospect Tower was officially condemned, and the trail leading to it was closed to public access. Warning signs went up. Fences were installed at the trailhead, but fences don't stop everyone, and warnings are just invitations to some people. Over the next few years, we had 3 more incidents. Hikers who ignored the warnings, who climbed the fences, who made it to the tower and found something. They all came back changed, quieter, more withdrawn. 2 of them moved away from Montana entirely. The third started a blog about her experience, calling it a spiritual awakening, writing about the voice of the wilderness and the invitation to return to nature. The blog disappeared after 6 months. So did she. Kowalski retired 2 years after the Harper incident. He'd been in the Forest Service for 35 years, and he told me at his retirement party that this was the only mystery he'd never solved, the only case that still kept him up at night. "You know what bothers me most?" he said, nursing a beer and looking out at the forest beyond the station. "It's not the disappearances. People get lost in the wilderness all the time. It's the pattern, the precision of it. Whatever's happening at that tower, it's been happening for at least 30 years, probably longer, and it's patient. It waits years between invitations, never pushes too hard, never makes itself too obvious, just waits." "You think it's intelligent?" I asked. "Conscious?" He was quiet for a long time. "I think the forest is older than we can imagine. And I think that maybe, just maybe, it remembers things we've forgotten. Ways of being that we left behind when we decided to build cities and cut down trees and pretend we were separate from nature." He finished his beer. "Or maybe I'm just an old man who spent too much time alone in the woods. Either way, I'm glad to be done with it." But I wasn't done with it. I'm still not. Because sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in my apartment, I wake up smelling coffee. Fresh, dark, with just a hint of vanilla or cinnamon. The scent fills my bedroom, so real and immediate that I get up and check the kitchen, convinced that I must have set the timer wrong on my coffee maker. But the kitchen is always dark and empty. No coffee brewing, no logical explanation. And in those moments, standing in my dark kitchen at 3 in the morning, I can feel it, the invitation. Still there, still patient, still waiting. It's stronger in the spring, when the forest is waking up. Quieter in winter, when everything sleeps. But it never completely goes away. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I accepted. If I drove out to that trailhead, climbed that tower, followed the call north to that ruined cabin. Would I find peace, like Michael Reeves claimed? Would I finally understand what Harper was talking about? Would all the stress and fear and constant vigilance finally end? But then I think about the people who loved Michael Reeves, who searched for him, who mourned him, who never got answers about what happened. I think about Harper's family, who watched their son become a stranger after his experience in that forest. I think about all the people left behind when someone accepts the invitation. And I know that whatever peace the forest offers, it comes at a cost, not just to the person who accepts, but to everyone who cared about them. So I ignore the smell of coffee when it comes. I close my eyes and breathe through my mouth until it fades. I remind myself that I have a life here, in the human world, with all its complications and difficulties and imperfect connections. But I also know that the invitation is still open, still waiting, patient as the trees, old as the mountains, eternal as the forest itself. All I have to do is accept. And some nights, when the loneliness feels particularly heavy and the world seems particularly harsh, that acceptance feels closer than it should. Like a door I could step through if I just stopped resisting. If I just let go, the forest remembers, and it's very, very patient. It has all the time in the world. There's something deeply unsettling about footprints that go the wrong way. Your brain sees them and immediately knows something is off, even if it takes a moment to understand exactly what. The human mind is wired to read tracks, to follow the story they tell. We've been doing it for thousands of years. So when the story doesn't make sense, when the prints tell you that someone was walking backward through deep snow in the middle of a Montana blizzard, every instinct screams that something is very, very wrong. My name is Reed Manson, and I've been a ranger in the Bitterroot National Forest for 8 years. In that time, I've seen my share of strange things. People do odd things in the wilderness, especially when they're lost or panicked or suffering from hypothermia. I found campers sleeping in trees, hikers walking in circles for hours, climbers who descended the wrong side of a mountain and ended up miles from where they thought they were. But I'd never seen anything like what I found on Snowline Trail in February of 2018. It started with a missing person report. A man named David Morgan had gone camping alone in the backcountry, planning a 3-day solo trip. When he didn't return by his scheduled date, his sister filed a report. Standard procedure in these cases is to check the trail registers first, see if we can establish where the person actually went versus where they said they were going. David had signed in at the Snowline Trail register 4 days earlier. His entry was neat and detailed. Solo winter camping, 3 days, experienced, proper gear. He'd listed his planned route, up Snowline Trail to the high meadow, then back down via the same trail. Simple enough. The kind of trip an experienced winter camper could do safely, assuming the weather cooperated. But the weather hadn't cooperated. 2 days into David's trip, a massive storm system had moved through, dumping nearly 2 feet of snow across the high country. The storm had passed, but it had been followed by bitter cold, the kind that turns fresh powder into something harder and more treacherous. Sawyer Klein and I geared up for the search. Sawyer was in his 5th year with the Forest Service, younger than me but solid in the field. He grew up in Montana, understood winter conditions in a way that couldn't be taught. When you're going into the backcountry in February to look for a missing person, those are the qualities you want in a partner. We started at the trailhead just after dawn. The parking lot was empty except for David's car, a blue Subaru that looked like it had been sitting there for days. Snow covered the windshield and hood undisturbed. We documented it, called in the license plate, and then headed up the trail. The first mile was easy enough. Snowline Trail follows an old logging road before branching off into steeper terrain. The snow was deep, but packed down enough that we could make decent time with our snowshoes. The forest was quiet in that way it gets after a big storm, the kind of silence that feels almost sacred. Our breath misted in the cold air, and ice crystals sparkled on the branches around us. "Beautiful day for it," Sawyer said, which was his way of staying positive. Search and rescue operations don't always end well, especially in winter, especially when someone's been missing for days. But you approach each one with hope, because the alternative is to become cynical and bitter, and that doesn't help anyone. We found David's first campsite about 3 miles up the trail. He'd set up in a small clearing, used a natural windbreak of rocks and dense pine. The campsite was abandoned, but orderly. His fire pit was buried under snow, and you could see where his tent had been pitched. But the tent was gone, along with all his gear. He'd broken camp and moved on, which suggested he'd been doing okay at that point. "At least he was mobile," Sawyer observed. "That's a good sign." We continued up the trail. The snow got deeper as we gained elevation, and the temperature dropped. By the time we reached the high meadow, David's stated destination, it was approaching noon, and we'd covered about 5 miles. The meadow was stunning. A broad expanse of white surrounded by peaks, with wind-sculpted snow creating patterns that looked like frozen waves. In summer, this place would be filled with wildflowers and the sound of meltwater. In winter, it was a pristine wilderness that could kill you if you weren't careful. We found David's second campsite on the edge of the meadow, tucked into a stand of trees. And this is where things started to feel wrong. The camp looked like he'd left in a hurry. His tent was still standing, but the door was open and snow had drifted inside. His sleeping bag was there, partially unzipped. A camp stove sat next to the fire pit, along with some freeze-dried food packages that hadn't been opened. "Reed," Sawyer called from near the tent. "You need to see this." I walked over and followed his gaze. Leading away from the tent, clearly visible in the snow, was a set of footprints. But they weren't leading away from the camp in the normal sense. They were leading away backward. I crouched down to examine them more closely. There was no doubt about it. The toe of each print was pointed towards the tent, while the heel was pointed away. Someone had walked backward, away from the camp, for at least 20 or 30 feet before the tracks disappeared into the tree line. "Could be he was dragging something," Sawyer suggested. "Walking backward while pulling gear? Maybe. But I didn't see any drag marks. And when I looked back at the camp, I didn't see any gear missing except what David would have been carrying on his person. We need to follow these." We entered the tree line, following the backward prints. The forest here was dense, lodgepole pine growing close together. The snow was slightly less deep under the canopy, and the prints were easier to see. They continued in a straight line, unwavering, toe pointed back the way they'd come. After about 50 yards, something even stranger happened. The prints changed direction. Not gradually, not like someone turning around. They just changed. At one point they were going north. At the next step, they were going east. The stride length didn't change, the depth didn't change, just the direction. "That's not possible," Sawyer said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It's not." We kept following. The prints led us on a zigzagging course through the forest, changing direction at seemingly random intervals. Sometimes they'd go straight for 100 feet, then turn 90 degrees. Other times they'd curve in a slow arc, then shoot off at a sharp angle. But they were always backward prints, always showing that the person, presumably David, had been walking in reverse. The forest got darker as we went deeper. The sun was past its zenith now, and the dense canopy blocked most of the remaining light. Our breath came in ragged plumes, and I could feel sweat starting to freeze on my back despite the cold. "How far does this go?" Sawyer asked. We'd been following the prints for maybe half a mile, covering ground that would have taken David much longer walking backward through deep snow. "Let's give it another 15 minutes, I said. "If we don't find anything by then, we mark the trail and call for additional resources." The prints led us to a small frozen creek. On the near side, they stopped at the creek's edge. On the far side, about 20 feet away, they resumed. But there were no prints in between, no tracks across the ice, no place where someone had jumped or slipped or crawled, just prints ending on one side and starting on the other. "He couldn't have jumped that," Sawyer said. "Not backward, not in this snow." "No." I examined the ice carefully. It looked solid, thick enough to support our weight. But there was no disturbance, no sign that anyone had crossed it. "But the prints continue on the other side." We crossed carefully, testing the ice before committing our full weight. On the far side, we picked up the trail again. The prints continued their impossible path, still backward, still changing direction at random intervals. Then we saw the rock face. It was a small cliff, maybe 15 feet tall, part of a larger ridge system that ran through this section of forest. The prints led directly to its base and stopped, just ended, as if David had walked backward into the rock and disappeared. "No way," Sawyer said, walking up to examine it. "No way someone climbed this backward." I checked the rock face carefully. There were no obvious handholds, no signs of climbing. The rock was smooth, covered in a thin layer of ice. Even an experienced climber with proper gear would have struggled with it. The idea of someone scaling it backward in the dark in a snowstorm was absurd. "Look for prints going around," I said. "Maybe he circled to find another way up." We searched the area thoroughly, walking in gradually widening circles around the base of the rock face. There were no other prints. The backward tracks led to this spot and simply ended, as if David Morgan had walked backward through the forest and vanished into solid stone. "There has to be an explanation," Sawyer said, but his voice lacked conviction. I pulled out my radio. "Base, this is Manson. We've found the subject's campsite and have been tracking footprints for approximately half a mile. Tracks show unusual patterns and terminate at a rock face with no obvious continuation. Requesting additional search personnel and technical climbing team. Over?" The response was immediate. "Copy that, Manson. What do you mean by unusual patterns? Over." I hesitated, knowing how this would sound. "Tracks appear to be backward prints. Base. Subject appears to have been walking in reverse. Over." A long pause. Then, "Repeat that, Manson. Did you say backward? Over?" "Affirmative. All prints show toes pointed toward origin and heels pointed toward destination. Over." Another pause. Longer this time. "Understood. Additional teams are being mobilized. Continue search of immediate area. Be advised, weather system moving in. You have approximately 3 hours before conditions deteriorate. Over?" "Copy that. Manson out." Sawyer was examining the base of the rock face again. "Reed, come look at this." I walked over. He was pointing at a small opening, barely visible behind a boulder. I'd missed it in my first examination because it was hidden by the angle of the rock and partially covered by snow. "Is that a cave?" I asked. "Let's find out." We cleared away some of the snow and discovered it was indeed a cave entrance, or, more accurately, a narrow crack in the rock face that opened into a larger space beyond. The opening was maybe 3 feet wide and 4 feet tall. You'd have to crouch to get through, but it was definitely passable. And in the snow, right at the entrance, partially covered but still visible, was something that made my blood run cold. A backpack, dark blue, expensive looking, the kind serious backpackers use. And attached to the back of it, on a small patch of fabric, was a name tag. David Morgan. Sawyer and I looked at each other. "He went in there," Sawyer said. "Or someone took his pack in there. Why would someone do that?" I had no answer. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it through the opening. The beam revealed a small cave, maybe 10 feet deep and 6 feet wide. Empty, except for some rock formations and a thick layer of dust and old leaves that must have blown in over the years. And no David Morgan. "I'm going in," I said. "We should wait for backup," Sawyer cautioned. "We don't have time. Weather's coming in, and if he's injured in there, every minute counts." I squeezed through the opening, feeling the rock scrape against my jacket. Inside, the cave was cold and dank, smelling of earth and old water. My flashlight beam swept across the interior, revealing nothing but rock and dirt. The backpack was lying against the far wall, propped up like someone had carefully placed it there. I opened it carefully, documenting everything with my phone camera before touching anything. Inside was the standard gear you'd expect from a winter camper. Extra clothing, food, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, a book, and a journal. I opened the journal. The entries were dated, starting from when David began his trip. The first day's entry was upbeat, talking about the beauty of the trail and his excitement for some time alone in the wilderness. The second day mentioned the approaching storm, but he seemed confident in his ability to handle it. The third day's entry was different. The handwriting was shakier, less controlled. "Something is wrong with the forest. I keep hearing footsteps behind me, but when I turn around, there's nothing there. Just my own tracks leading back the way I came. But the spacing is wrong. Like someone's been following in my exact footsteps, matching my stride perfectly. I tried to catch them, waited behind a tree. Nothing. Just wind and snow and my own paranoia. The fourth entry was even worse. The footprints are wrong. I know they're wrong. When I look ahead, I see my prints going forward. When I look back, I see the same prints, but they look like I've been walking backward. How is that possible? I'm not crazy. I know how footprints work. But these are wrong. Everything is wrong. The trees are in different places than they were before. The landmarks don't match my map. I'm lost, but I can't be lost because I've been following my own tracks, and they should lead back to camp, but they don't. They go in circles, they go nowhere. There were more entries, each one more disjointed than the last. David had clearly been experiencing some kind of breakdown, possibly hypothermia or altitude sickness. The final entry was just one line, written in shaky block letters. They walk where I walked. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I photographed every page of the journal, then carefully placed it back in the pack. The rest of the gear told me nothing new. Standard equipment, all of it. Nothing that would explain where David had gone or why his pack was here. "Reed, you need to come out here," Sawyer's voice came from outside the cave, tight with tension. I squeezed back through the opening. Sawyer was standing a few feet away, looking down at the snow. His face was pale. "What is it?" He pointed. "Watch." As I stood there, a new footprint appeared in the snow. Not like someone stepping down and leaving an impression. More like the snow was reshaping itself, creating a print where none had been before. As I watched, another appeared next to it. Then another. They were forming a trail, leading away from the cave, going deeper into the forest. And they were backward prints, heel toward us, toes pointing away. "That's not possible," I said. But even as I spoke, another print materialized in the snow. Sawyer grabbed my arm. "We need to leave right now." He was right. Something was very wrong here. Something beyond missing person protocols and search procedures. But I couldn't shake the thought that David might still be alive, might still need our help. "We follow them," I said. "Just a little farther. If we don't find David in the next 100 yards, we mark the location and get out." "Reed, 100 yards, then we're done." Sawyer looked like he wanted to argue, but he nodded. We followed the materializing prints deeper into the forest, watching as each new track appeared in the snow ahead of us, marking an impossible path. The forest seemed darker here, though the sun hadn't set yet. The trees grew closer together, their branches interweaving overhead to block out what little light remained. Our flashlights created strange shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. After about 50 yards, the prints led us to a small clearing. And in that clearing, standing perfectly still, was a figure. At first, I thought it was David. The build was right, and the clothing matched what his sister had described. But as we got closer, I realized something was wrong with the way the figure was standing. The posture was too rigid, too unnatural, like a mannequin or a statue. "David Morgan," I called out. "This is the Forest Service. We're here to help." No response. The figure didn't move, didn't turn around. Sawyer and I approached carefully, hands on our radios, ready to call for emergency medical if needed. As we got within 10 feet, I could see the figure was indeed wearing camping gear. A heavy jacket, snow pants, boots. But there was something wrong with the colors, like looking at someone through a dirty window. "David?" I said again, reaching out to touch the figure's shoulder. My hand passed through empty air. The figure wasn't there. It was like a projection, an image with no substance. As I watched, it faded slightly, becoming more translucent. I could see the trees through it, the snow, the sky beyond. "What the hell is this?" Sawyer whispered. The figure slowly turned to face us, and I saw that it had David's face, or something like David's face, based on the photo his sister had provided. But the eyes were wrong, empty, hollow, like windows into nothing. The apparition opened its mouth as if to speak. No sound came out, but I could see the words forming on its lips. "They walk where I walked." Then it simply disappeared. Not fading gradually, not moving away, just gone, like someone had flipped a switch. Sawyer and I stood frozen in the clearing, our flashlights illuminating empty snow. The only sound was our own ragged breathing and the soft whisper of wind through the trees. "We're leaving," Sawyer said. "Right now, we're leaving, and we're not coming back." I wanted to argue, wanted to keep searching, to find answers, to locate David Morgan and bring him home safely. But every instinct I had was screaming that we were in danger, that we needed to get away from this place as quickly as possible. "Okay," I said, "let's go." We made it maybe 20 yards before we realized we had a problem. Our own tracks, the ones we'd made coming into the clearing, were gone, not covered by fresh snow, not drifted over, just gone, as if we'd never made them at all. "Where's the trail?" Sawyer spun in a circle, his flashlight beam sweeping across the snow. "Reed, where the hell is the trail?" I pulled out my GPS unit. The screen flickered, showing our position as a blinking dot surrounded by static. No terrain features, no marked trails, no waypoints. Just us, floating in digital nowhere. "Device is malfunctioning," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Let's use the compass." I pulled out my backup compass, the reliable mechanical kind that doesn't depend on satellites or batteries. The needle spun lazily, unable to find north. I tapped it, shook it, waited. The needle just kept spinning. My hands were shaking now, and not from the cold. In 8 years of wilderness work, I'd relied on these tools countless times. They were designed to be foolproof, tested in the most extreme conditions. The compass especially. It was a simple magnetic instrument that had worked reliably since the 12th century. There was no reasonable explanation for it to fail unless we were standing on a massive iron deposit or directly under power lines, neither of which existed in this remote section of forest. "Let me see yours," I said to Sawyer. He pulled out his compass. Same result. The needle wandered aimlessly, occasionally stopping for a second before drifting away again, as if north itself had become uncertain. "We need to stay calm," I said, though I was speaking more to myself than to Sawyer. "People get lost in the woods all the time. We have training for this. We have protocols." "Protocols don't account for this," Sawyer said, his voice tight. "This isn't normal getting lost. Our tracks didn't just disappear, Reed. Snow doesn't erase tracks that fast, not without wind, not without fresh precipitation. And our equipment doesn't all fail simultaneously unless what?" I snapped, fear making me sharp. "Unless we're in some kind of cursed forest. Unless we've crossed into another dimension. Come on, Sawyer. There has to be a rational explanation. Then give me one. Give me a rational explanation for backward footprints that appear out of nowhere. For a ghost we both saw. For all our tracks vanishing and our equipment dying at the exact same moment." I had no answer, because he was right, and the part of me that wanted to cling to logic and reason was rapidly losing ground to the part that understood we were in serious danger. "This is wrong," Sawyer said, and I could hear the edge of panic in his voice. "This is all wrong. Equipment doesn't just fail like this, not all at once." He was right. In my 8 years as a ranger, I'd never seen a GPS and compass both fail simultaneously. These were redundant systems, designed to work independently. The odds of both malfunctioning at the same time were astronomical. "Okay," I said, forcing myself to think logically. "We know we came from the south. The sun sets in the west. We can use that to orient ourselves." But when I looked up to find the sun, I realized the sky had changed. The clear blue of earlier had been replaced by a uniform gray, the kind of overcast that makes it impossible to determine the sun's position. And it was darker than it should have been. We'd entered the clearing maybe 10 minutes ago, but the light level suggested it was closer to dusk. "How long have we been here?" Sawyer asked, checking his watch. Then he held it up to show me. The hands were spinning backward, cycling through hours and minutes in reverse. I checked my own watch. Same thing. The digital display showed numbers changing randomly, meaningless sequences of digits that bore no relationship to actual time. "We need to pick a direction and move," I said. "Standing here won't help. We'll walk in a straight line until we hit something we recognize. The creek, the rock face, the meadow, anything. What if we walk in circles? What if we end up back here? Then at least we'll know we're going in circles and we can adjust." I pulled out a roll of bright orange flagging tape, the kind we use to mark trails and search grids. "We'll leave markers every 50 feet. If we see our own markers, we'll know we've looped back." It was a basic technique, one we'd both used dozens of times in search operations. But as I tied the first piece of tape to a tree branch, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were past the point where basic techniques would help. We started walking, heading in what I hoped was roughly south. I counted steps, tying off flagging tape every 50 paces. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees growing denser, the shadows deeper. Our flashlight beams seemed less effective than they should be, as if the darkness was somehow absorbing the light. After what felt like 20 minutes of walking, we came to a small clearing. A very familiar clearing. "No," Sawyer said. "No, we didn't turn around. We were walking straight. We couldn't have..." But there was the tree where I'd tied the first piece of flagging tape, bright orange against the dark bark. We'd walked in a perfect circle and ended up exactly where we'd started. "Okay," I said, trying to ignore the tight feeling in my chest. "Okay, we try a different direction. We'll go west this time, or what we think is west. Reed, this isn't normal getting lost. Something is actively preventing us from leaving. We don't know that. Could be a magnetic anomaly. Could be disorientation from the altitude. Could be what we saw back there wasn't hypothermia or hallucination. Could be something else is happening here." I wanted to argue with him, to insist on a rational explanation, but the words wouldn't come. Because he was right. This was beyond normal search and rescue scenarios, beyond getting turned around in the backcountry. This was something else entirely. "Let's try anyway," I said. "We're not giving up." We headed in a new direction, leaving more flagging tape. This time, I counted steps carefully, memorizing landmarks. A tree with a distinctive broken branch, a boulder half buried in snow, a cluster of smaller pines growing together. If we looped back, I'd recognize them. We walked for what felt like 30 minutes. I counted 800 steps. We should have covered at least a third of a mile, maybe more. But when we emerged into another clearing, those same landmarks were there. The broken branch, the boulder, the cluster of pines. We'd walked 800 steps in a straight line and ended up in the same place. "This is impossible," Sawyer said. "This is literally impossible." I pulled out my radio, knowing it probably wouldn't work, but needing to try. "Base, this is Manson. We have an emergency situation. Our position is compromised, equipment is malfunctioning, and were unable to navigate out of the search area. Request immediate assistance. Over. Static. Then, faintly, through the white noise, a voice. Not dispatch. Not anyone from the ranger station. They walk where I walked. It was David Morgan's voice, or something that sounded like David Morgan. They walk where I walked. They walk where I walked. They walk where I walked. The phrase repeated, overlapping with itself, creating a disturbing chorus of identical voices all saying the same thing. Sawyer grabbed the radio from my hand and shut it off. No, we're not listening to that. We need to call for help. That wasn't help, that was... He trailed off, unable to find words for what it was. In the silence that followed, we heard something else. Footsteps, crunching through snow, coming from multiple directions. Steady, rhythmic, getting closer. We turned in a slow circle, flashlights sweeping the forest. I caught glimpses of movement between the trees. Figures, lots of them, walking toward us with that same rigid, unnatural posture we'd seen in the apparition of David Morgan. "We run," I said. "Which way?" "Any way. Now." We ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at our faces. Behind us, I could hear the footsteps keeping pace, not speeding up to chase us, but not falling behind either, just maintaining that steady mechanical rhythm. I don't know how long we ran. Time had lost all meaning in this place. Could have been 5 minutes, could have been an hour. But eventually, Sawyer stumbled and went down, and I stopped to help him up. "I'm okay," he gasped. "Just caught my snowshoe on something." We stood there, breathing hard, listening. The footsteps had stopped. The forest was silent again, that oppressive quiet that felt like a living thing pressing in on us. "I don't think running helps," I said. "I think we're going to end up right back where we started no matter what we do." "So what do we do?" I thought about David Morgan's journal, about his final entry. "They walk where I walked." What did that mean? Who were they, and why would they walk where he walked? Then it hit me. The backward footprints. The prints that changed direction randomly. They weren't David's prints at all. They were something else's prints. Something that was following him, copying his path in reverse. Walking where he had walked, but backward. Retracing his steps in impossible ways. "The prints," I said slowly. "The backward prints. They're not from David walking backward. They're from something following his trail in reverse, like it's undoing his path, erasing where he went. What would do that? Why would anything do that? I don't know. But David wrote that they walk where he walked. What if he figured something out? What if there's a way to break the pattern?" Sawyer looked at me skeptically. "You're reaching, Reed. We need to focus on survival, not solving mysteries." He was right, but something about this felt important. David had left his journal for a reason. He'd wanted someone to find it, to understand what happened to him. Maybe he'd left other clues too. "The backpack," I said. "We need to go back to the cave. There might be something else in it, something I missed." "Go back? Reed, we don't even know which direction the cave is. We can't find our way out of this clearing." "Then we follow the backward prints. They led us to the cave before. Maybe they'll lead us back." As if in response to my words, fresh prints began appearing in the snow, materializing just like before, one after another, creating a trail leading away from the clearing. Sawyer stared at them. "You think that's a good idea? Following whatever's making those prints?" "I think it's the only idea we've got." We followed the prints through the forest. They led us on a winding path, sometimes doubling back on themselves, sometimes making sharp turns for no apparent reason. But gradually I started to recognize landmarks. The frozen creek, the zigzag pattern through the dense pines, the small cliff face, and there was the cave entrance, exactly as we'd left it. "Okay," Sawyer said. "We're here. Now what?" I crawled back into the cave and pulled out David's backpack. This time, I went through it more carefully, examining every pocket, every item. There had to be something I'd missed, some clue about what David had figured out. In the bottom of the main compartment, under the extra clothing, I found a small waterproof pouch. Inside was a second journal, smaller than the first. The pages were filled with sketches and diagrams, along with notes written in cramped handwriting. The diagrams showed the trail system, but annotated with strange symbols and measurements, lines connecting different points on the map, angles calculated between landmarks, notes about timing and distances. "He was trying to figure out the pattern," I said, showing Sawyer the journal. "Look, he mapped where the backward prints appeared, where they changed direction, where they led. He was trying to predict where they'd go next. Did he figure it out?" I flipped through the pages. The notes became more frantic toward the end, but also more focused, and on the last page, David had written something that made my blood run cold. The prints follow a route, but in reverse. Not just backward in space, but backward in time. They're showing me where I will walk, not where I walked. The forest is moving backward, unwinding itself. If I follow them forward, I'll disappear. But if I walk them backward, if I retrace the route the way it's meant to be walked, maybe I can get out. Below that, he'd drawn a detailed map showing a route from the cave through the forest to what looked like the trailhead. Every turn was marked, every landmark noted, and at the bottom, in capitals, "Walk it backward to go forward." "He figured out how to escape," I said. "We need to follow this route, but we need to walk it backward." Sawyer looked at the map, then at me. "You want us to walk backward through the forest, following a map drawn by a missing man who probably died out here? You have a better idea?" He thought about it for a long moment, then, No, I really don't. Walking backward through a forest in the dark while following a hand-drawn map is exactly as difficult as it sounds. We quickly established a system. I would hold the map and flashlight walking backward while calling out directions. Sawyer would walk backward behind me, occasionally grabbing my shoulder to warn me about obstacles I couldn't see. The route David had mapped out was circuitous and seemingly random. From the cave, we were supposed to walk backward northwest for approximately 100 steps, then turn and walk backward east for 50 steps, then northwest again for 75 steps. The directions continued like that, a complex pattern of turns and distances that made no logical sense as a navigation route. But as we followed it, I started to notice something. The forest was changing. Not dramatically, not in ways that were immediately obvious, but subtle shifts in the tree placement, in the way the snow lay on the ground, and the quality of the light filtering through the canopy. It was like we were moving through slightly different versions of the same forest, each one almost identical to the last, but not quite. "Do you feel that?" Sawyer asked, after we'd been walking for maybe 20 minutes. "Like we're moving through something?" "Yeah, I feel it." With each turn, each counted step backward, the oppressive weight that had been pressing on us since we found the clearing began to lift. The darkness wasn't quite as dark. The silence wasn't quite as oppressive. Even our equipment started working again. I noticed my watch was showing normal time, and when I checked the GPS, it actually showed our position on the map. "We're coming out of it," I said. "Whatever we were caught in, David's route is leading us out." But then I heard the footsteps again. Not behind us this time, ahead of us. Which, since we were walking backward, meant they were actually behind us in terms of where we were going. Multiple sets of footsteps, maintaining that same mechanical rhythm. "Keep moving," Sawyer said urgently. "Don't stop. Don't look back." We increased our pace, still walking backward but faster now. The footsteps kept pace with us, never gaining ground but never falling behind either. I could feel eyes on us, could sense the presence of the figures we'd seen earlier. David's route led us across the frozen creek. We had to turn and walk forward to cross it. There was no way to navigate the ice safely while walking backward, but as soon as we reached the other side, we resumed the backward walk. The footsteps stopped at the creek's edge, as if whatever was following us couldn't cross the water. "Why did they stop?" Sawyer asked. "I don't know. Maybe the pattern breaks at the creek. Maybe..." The footsteps started again, but now they were ahead of us on the far side of the creek. They'd somehow gotten across without making any sound, without leaving any tracks. And they were closer now, much closer. I looked at David's map. We were maybe halfway through the route, but the second half seemed to take us even deeper into the forest before eventually circling back toward the trailhead. If those things caught up with us before we completed the pattern, we need to move faster, I said. We pushed ourselves, walking backward as quickly as we dared. My calves were screaming from the unnatural movement, and I'd nearly tripped and fallen a dozen times. But we kept going, following David's route with mechanical precision. The footsteps grew closer. I could hear breathing now, ragged and wrong, like something that didn't quite know how to breathe properly. Cold air washed over us, colder than the winter temperature alone could account for. Then Sawyer grabbed my shoulder hard. "Reed, stop. Don't move." I froze. "What is it?" "Look down, slowly." I looked. We were standing at the edge of a ravine, one that definitely hadn't been there before. The ground dropped away into darkness, and I could hear water running somewhere far below. One more step backward, and I would have walked right off the edge. The ravine was massive, easily 50 feet across and dropping into depths I couldn't see even with my flashlight. The sound of water was loud, echoing off unseen walls, creating the impression of a vast underground river system. Wind rushed up from below, carrying the smell of wet stone and something else, something organic and rotten that made my stomach turn. "That wasn't on the map," Sawyer said, his voice barely above a whisper. He was right. David's map showed nothing about a ravine in this location, which meant either the forest had changed since he drew it, or we'd made a mistake following the route. I pulled out the map and studied it carefully, forcing my hands to steady even though adrenaline was screaming through my system. We'd followed every turn, counted every step. I'd been meticulous, obsessive even, unless... I looked at the notes in the margins. David had written something next to this section of the route, so small I'd missed it before. "They will try to redirect you. Trust the pattern, not your eyes. The forest will show you obstacles that aren't there, dangers that don't exist. It wants you to break the pattern, to turn around, to start walking forward again. Don't. The moment you break the pattern, you're lost for good." I read the words aloud to Sawyer and watched his face go pale in the flashlight beam. "So, this ravine might not be real?" he asked. "Or it's real, but not in the way we're seeing it." I looked at the ravine again, then at my feet. The snow showed our backward footprints leading right to the edge, but something was wrong with the way the snow lay at the edge. It didn't slope down into the ravine the way it should. Instead, there was a sharp, almost artificial line where the snow ended and the darkness began. Like a photograph badly edited, where the join between two images was visible if you looked closely enough. I knelt down carefully, extending my hand toward the edge of the ravine. My glove should have passed over empty air, should have felt the updraft from below. Instead, my hand encountered resistance. Not solid resistance, not like touching rock or ice, more like pushing through cobwebs or very cold water. A membrane of some kind, barely there but definitely present. "It's an illusion," I said, pulling my hand back and looking at my glove. It was wet, though nothing visible had touched it. Or not an illusion exactly, more like a projection, something layered over reality. "I don't understand," Sawyer said. "How can we see it if it's not real?" "I don't know. Maybe it's affecting our perception directly. Maybe it's some kind of natural phenomenon we don't have a name for. But David's route says to keep going." He knew this would happen. I stood up and looked at the ravine one more time. Every sense I had told me it was real. I could see the depth, hear the water, feel the wind, smell the decay. The human brain is very, very good at creating coherent reality from sensory input. But it's also remarkably easy to fool if you know how, and something in this forest knew how. "Reed, I can see the ravine. I can hear water," Sawyer said, echoing my own thoughts. "I know, but look at the snow. Look at the way it lies. Does that look like the edge of a cliff to you?" Sawyer studied it for a long moment, really looked instead of just seeing. "No," he admitted slowly. "No, it doesn't. The snow's too flat, too perfect, and the edge is too sharp, like it was cut with a knife. We keep walking backward, trust the pattern. And if you're wrong, if it's a real ravine and we walk off the edge..." I thought about David Morgan, about the journal entries documenting his descent into paranoia and fear, but also about his final map, drawn with such care and precision. He'd been a GIS specialist before becoming a camper, according to his sister. He understood maps, understood navigation, understood how to document terrain accurately. If anyone could create a reliable route through this impossible place, it would be him. He'd found a way out. He'd mapped the route for anyone who came after him. I had to trust that. "Then we fall," I said. "But I don't think we will." Before I could second-guess myself, I took a step backward. My foot came down on solid ground. The ravine remained ahead of me, visible and apparently real, but I was standing where the ravine should be, on ground that felt perfectly solid. "It's an illusion," I said. "Come on." Sawyer followed, and together we walked backward through the impossible ravine. Around us, the illusion held. We could see the drop, hear the water, feel the vertigo of standing at the edge. But our feet stayed on solid ground, following David's pattern through the deception. The footsteps behind us grew frantic, breaking their mechanical rhythm. I heard something that might have been voices crying out in frustration or anger. But we kept walking backward, trusting the map, trusting the pattern, and then suddenly we were through. The ravine vanished like it had never been, and the footsteps stopped completely. The oppressive weight lifted entirely, and I could breathe normally again. When I checked my GPS, it showed us less than a quarter mile from the trailhead. "Are we out?" Sawyer asked. "Are we actually out?" I looked at David's map. We'd completed the route. Every step, every turn, exactly as he'd drawn it. "Yeah," I said, "I think we're out." We turned around, facing forward now, and walked the rest of the way to the trailhead normally. When we emerged from the forest, the parking lot was full of vehicles. Search and rescue teams, sheriff's deputies, even a helicopter was landing in the nearby field. Kowalski came running over when he saw us. "Where the hell have you been? You've been missing for 3 days." 3 days? I looked at Sawyer in shock. "No. We went in this morning. It's been maybe 6 hours." Kowalski stared at us. "It's been 3 days. You missed your check-in 3 days ago, and we've had teams searching for you ever since. We found your camp, found where you went into the cave, but your tracks just disappeared. We thought..." He stopped, took a breath. We thought we'd lost you too." The medical team swarmed us, checking vitals, wrapping us in warming blankets. We were dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise physically fine. Mentally was another story. While they checked us over, I told Kowalski what had happened. The backward prints, the apparition, getting lost in the pattern, finding David's map, all of it. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, his expression was grave. "We need to close that entire section," he said. "Whatever's happening up there, it's beyond our ability to handle safely." "What about David Morgan?" "We never found him. He could still be—" "He's gone, Reed. We found his body 2 days ago, about a mile from where you found his backpack. Exposure and hypothermia, medical examiner says he'd been dead for days. But here's the thing. We found him before you went missing, which means you were following the map of a dead man who we'd already recovered." I felt cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. "That's not possible. We found his journals in the cave. We recovered all of David Morgan's belongings, including his journals, both of them, when we identified his body." Kowalski pulled out an evidence bag containing 2 journals, one large, one small, both identical to the ones I'd found in the cave. Then what did I find? I pulled out my phone to show him the photos I'd taken of the journal pages. But when I pulled up the images, they showed nothing but blank pages. Every photo I'd taken in the cave, every page of David's notes and diagrams was completely blank. Sawyer checked his phone. Mine too, all blank. "Here's what I think happened," Kowalski said carefully. "I think you two experienced some kind of shared delusion brought on by environmental stress. You got turned around in the forest, lost your bearings, and your minds created a narrative to help you survive. The backward prints, the apparitions, David's map, they were real to you, but they weren't objectively real." I wanted to argue, but part of me wondered if he was right. Hypothermia can cause hallucinations. So can hypoxia, dehydration, stress. Maybe we had created the whole thing, a shared survival delusion that gave us a framework to navigate back to safety. But then I remembered something. "The flagging tape," I said. "We left flagging tape when we were trying to find our way out. If we were really lost for 3 days, there should be tape all over that section of forest." Kowalski nodded. "There is. We found dozens of pieces covering an area of about 3 square miles. Your tracks were all over the place too, leading in circles and strange patterns. That's how we knew you were disoriented." "And the cave? David's backpack?" "Cave was empty when we found it. No backpack, no gear. We think David cached his gear somewhere else, maybe in multiple locations, trying to lighten his load. We're still searching for some of his equipment." It all made sense. It was the rational explanation, the one that didn't require believing in supernatural forests or impossible geometry. Sawyer and I had gotten lost, hallucinated a complex narrative, and somehow stumbled back to the trailhead by following a pattern our stressed minds had created. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it, that what we'd experienced was real even if it didn't make sense, that David Morgan had left us a map because he knew others would follow him into that impossible place, and he wanted to give them a way out. They kept us in the hospital for 2 days, running tests and monitoring for signs of frostbite or permanent damage from exposure. We were remarkably healthy, all things considered. The doctors couldn't explain why we showed no signs of hypothermia or frostbite after 3 days in sub-freezing conditions. The psychological evaluation was more difficult. I gave the answer I was supposed to give. Severe environmental stress leading to perceptual distortions. The psychologist signed the form clearing me for duty, but her look said she didn't quite believe me. Sawyer and I compared notes afterward. We'd both given nearly identical rational explanations, both utterly inadequate to describe what had actually happened. We agreed to keep the truth to ourselves. The official investigation concluded we'd experienced severe environmental disorientation. They found our flagging tape covering an impossibly large area, our tracks zigzagging without sense, but no backward footprints, no apparitions, just two rangers who'd gotten lost and survived. The official report blamed carbon monoxide poisoning from a malfunctioning camp stove, despite the fact we'd had no stove with us. People create explanations to fit what they want to believe, rather than accepting evidence that challenges reality. David Morgan's death was ruled accidental, and his case was closed. But I kept thinking about his final journal entry. They walk where I walked. What if there really was something in that forest? Something that followed people's paths in reverse, trapping them in patterns they couldn't escape. 6 months after the incident, I found the second journal, David's map, in my pack. It shouldn't have been there. All evidence had been returned to his family. But there it was, real and solid, with pages covered in handwriting and diagrams. I photographed every page with an old digital camera, backed up the files to multiple USB drives stored in different locations. The images came out clear and readable, proof that what we'd experienced was real. For weeks, I debated what to do with this proof. Showing it to authorities could seal off the area, attracting curiosity seekers who'd enter without the map. Or they'd send researchers who'd become victims too. The map was valuable because it was rare. I created 6 copies and hid them strategically, one in a geocache near the trailhead, one in the ranger station archives, one with the Historical Society, one given to Sawyer, one in my desk, and one buried at the clearing where we'd first gotten lost. My relationship with Sawyer changed after the incident. We'd survived something together that no one else could understand. We met for coffee every few weeks to talk about the one thing we couldn't discuss with anyone else. He'd started having the dreams too, walking backward through endless snow, pursued by figures that were almost but not quite human. Sometimes he'd see me in the dreams, also walking backward, and we'd both know that if either of us broke the pattern and turned forward, we'd both be lost forever. I did some research, he told me about 8 months after the incident. About that area of forest, the history of it, and Snowline Trail has the highest rate of missing persons per square mile of any location in Montana, has for decades. People go in and just don't come back. The Forest Service knows about it, obviously, but there's no public acknowledgement because they can't explain it. How many people? 17 documented disappearances since 1960, but that's just the ones where someone filed a report. Could be more. Could be a lot more. 17 people. 17 families wondering what happened. 17 mysteries that would never be solved by conventional means. Did any of them leave journals? Maps? Not that I could find. David Morgan was the first, or maybe just the first whose notes survived long enough for someone to find them. That thought haunted me. How many people had figured out the pattern but died before they could pass on the knowledge? How many solutions had been lost? David Morgan had made it far enough to create his map and hide his journals. He'd understood he was probably going to die, but he'd made sure his knowledge would survive. That was courage of a kind I'd rarely seen. A year after the incident, the Forest Service officially closed that entire section. The official reason was geological instability, but I knew the truth. Too many people were going missing. They put up fences, warning signs, surveillance cameras. They posted rangers at access points. They did everything they could to keep people out. It wasn't enough. Within 6 months of closure, 2 more people vanished. A thrill seeker who posted on social media about exploring the forbidden forest, and a local teenager who'd heard stories. Neither body was found. Neither had David's map. 3 years after the incident, as sector supervisor, I accessed historical records going back to 1947. Reports of unusual snow formations and disorienting terrain appeared regularly. Backward footprints always preceded disappearances. In 1947, a hunter saw footprints that walked backward toward nothing. His partner disappeared 3 days later. In 1963, a geology student reported anomalous track formations. She disappeared 2 weeks later, but her field notes survived, containing sketches matching exactly what we'd seen. In 1979, a Forest Service ranger wrote about impossible tracks and recommended scientific study. Instead, he was transferred and the report buried. The pattern went back further than recorded history. The Salish tribes had stories about places where the world walks backward, and time circles like a hunting wolf. They knew to avoid certain areas where trees grew too close and shadows never fell right. We'd dismiss those stories as mythology, primitive attempts to explain natural phenomena. We'd convinced ourselves that we understood the world completely, that there were no more mysteries left to discover. The forest proved us wrong. I started keeping my own records. Not official incident reports, but personal files documenting every strange occurrence in that sector. Equipment failures that couldn't be explained. Hikers who reported disorientation in areas where navigation should have been easy. The occasional glimpse of something that might have been footprints but couldn't be examined before they disappeared. And I started connecting with other rangers who'd encountered similar impossibilities. Through quiet conversations over beers, late-night phone calls, emails from personal accounts, not through official channels, which would have gotten me flagged as unreliable. I discovered I wasn't alone. Across the western United States, in remote wilderness areas from Washington to New Mexico, rangers were encountering things they couldn't explain. Tracks that defied physics. Places where time moved differently. Clearings where compasses failed and GPS units displayed impossible locations. Most kept quiet, just like I had. Talking about it meant being labeled unstable, suffering from isolation-induced psychosis. But they knew what they'd experienced was real. They were relieved to find others who believed them, who'd seen similar things, who understood. We formed an informal network, shared information, compared notes, tried to find patterns. Some areas seemed more active than others. Some years saw more incidents. There were theories, ley lines, magnetic anomalies, underground geological features, but nothing that fully explained what we were experiencing. But we also shared survival techniques, ways to navigate when normal methods failed, signs that indicated danger and methods to escape. And most importantly, we shared the knowledge that these places existed, that they were real, and that conventional wilderness navigation didn't apply there. David Morgan's map became legend among us. Most rangers who'd heard about it assumed it was a myth, a story exaggerated in the telling. But I knew better. I'd held it in my hands. I'd followed its route and survived because of it. I never revealed I had copies. That seemed too dangerous, too likely to draw the wrong kind of attention. But I made sure anyone reporting incidents near Snowline Trail received an anonymous message afterward. Just a simple note. If you need to walk backward through the forest, there's a map. Check the geocache near the trailhead. Some would dismiss it as a prank. Others might find the cache and consider it creative fiction. But a few would understand, would recognize the truth in David's words because they'd experienced the same impossibilities. And those few would survive because David Morgan had the courage to document what he learned before the forest took him. That's all any of us can do, really. Face the impossible, learn what we can, pass that knowledge to whoever comes next. The forest will always be there, patient and strange and older than we can comprehend. It will always create those backward prints, will always draw the curious deeper into impossible geometry. But if we're lucky, if we're very lucky, the knowledge of how to survive will persist too. Passed from person to person, journal to journal, whispered conversation to late-night email. A shadow network of understanding running parallel to official denials and rational explanations. Because in that forest, the normal rules don't apply. Sometimes survival means accepting the impossible and walking backward into safety. The forest remembers every step, and if you're willing to walk them in reverse, if you're willing to trust what makes no sense, it will let you leave. But only if you follow the pattern exactly, only if you walk where they walked, but backward through time and space, unmaking your route as you go. David Morgan left us the map, and I'll make sure it reaches whoever needs it next.